Hello, folks. Welcome back to our Philippines week. James Zobel from the MacArthur Memorial is back to talk about POWs. This is based on a current exhibit at the memorial called The Price of Unpreparedness. I had a few new viewers over the last few days. If you're new to the channel, please don't forget to subscribe. The information you need is always in the description below. You'll find links to, for example, the MacArthur Memorial is linked below, other resources, social media, etc., etc. But without further ado, I'm going to bring Jim in. So good afternoon, Jim. How are you today?
Just well, great, thanks.
So the MacArthur Memorial, I mean, it encompasses all sort of aspects of an amazing figure's life, but now you're focusing on the POW experience. So before we bring up the actual presentation, tell us a little bit about the exhibition and why it was set up.
Yeah, well, this is something we've wanted to do for about 30 years here at the MacArthur Memorial, as long as I've been here. But the problem is we didn't have a lot of materials to do it. As you can imagine, most of those guys that get captured on Bataan Corregidor, a lot of them hold MacArthur responsible. And they weren't donating materials to the MacArthur Memorial. Within the past few years, I got some pretty big collections by people that were focused directly on this story, the prisoners of war, and they supplied thousands of photographs, thousands of transcripts, oral histories, interviews with all these prisoners of war that finally made it possible for us to do this. And once we started going, we have a lot of people in the industry that were helpful in getting us artifacts for this. So this is something that just came on display September 30th, and it'll run through 2025.
Brilliant. And I'm assuming that it's a subject that people kind of think they know about, but then when you get into the depth of it, there's a lot more to the story. Because I mean, the Bataan Death March and experience is presumably up there with, you know, Pearl Harbor and Midway as one of the most commonly understood American stories from the early part of the war. But I'm guessing that the exhibition, as will your talk tonight, will kind of go into areas that people don't normally think of.
Yeah, I think people know those names. But no, I don't think they know a great deal about it. It's not a heartwarming story. It is something that draws you into the abyss real quick with all those men. This is, something that no one wants to go through, and it's like I said, the reason we called it the price of unpreparedness is because America wasn't ready for what was going to happen. The Philippines weren't ready for what was going to happen, and even the Japanese weren't ready for what was about to happen with the prisoners that were going to be taken there with the fall of the Philippines.
Okay, well, brilliant stuff. So over to you then, Jim. And folks, if you've seen James before, you'll realize that there's a lot of detail. There'll be a lot of information coming your way. So kind of maybe hang fire for some of your questions, because they may well be answered naturally as the show goes on. But obviously we will tackle them. And Jim is having to watch on his phone as well, because for some reason he can't see the slides. We couldn't last time, but this time he's on his phone as well. So over to you, Jim, and just tell me when you want me to move on slides.
Sure, thank you. Well, within the first 5 months after Pearl Harbor, Japan conquered enough territory. They embraced about 110 million new subjects. And as well, they took about 132,000 prisoners. Within the Philippines, after a 5-month campaign, they took about 75,000 Filipino prisoners and about 20,000 U.S. prisoners. Now, nearly one half of those that are captured, Americans, they're going to die in captivity. And with the Filipinos, you're going to lose about 45% of those that are captured. It's basically a nightmare, that these people were forced to endure, and they're going to die of starvation, medical neglect, brutality, and the survivors, the liberated. They, if you read all those books, they all wanted a lesson to be learned from this. They all said, what can people learn from this experience that we went through? And most of them, they then focus on that unpreparedness, that they had been thrown into this situation without the right type of material, without enough people, without enough airplanes, everything else. And then they had to pay that price. And so basically from all those books, it comes down to that question of, what is the lesson that comes from Bataan? Next slide, please. Now, this is Ben Steele, and Ben Steele was a soldier out there in the Pacific. He was indoctrinated in 1940 and went into the Air Corps. And in late 1941, he's with thousands of those Air Corps personnel that then are sent to the Philippines. And I highlight him because he was a very famous artist, and he goes through the Clark Field, the Death March. He's in Camp O'Donnell. He's into Bilibid. He's on one of the worst work details there is at Tayabas Road. And when he's in Bilibid and recuperating, he had beriberi so bad they thought he was going to die. They noticed that he could draw, and he didn't know he could draw because he starts etching in the dirt, and they started bringing him pads, pens, and he starts creating all this artwork for the experience. And so throughout his life, he would keep going back to these experiences. And at 99, just weeks before he died, he donated all that to the MacArthur Memorial. And so you're going to see a lot of that artwork in this story tonight. And you can go on to the next slide. Now, this is what we call the burden of surrender, because all those top commanders are going to be hauled out of the Philippines. Admiral Tommy Hart, he was head of the Asiatic fleet over there. He had a small force of capital ships. They were all sent south even before the war happens in the southern waters of the Philippines. And then when the war starts, they're pretty much sent all south. And all you've got is the 16th Naval personnel, a bunch of auxiliary ships that are there. And then when the Japanese invade the Philippines in December of 1941, his submarines fail miserably. They had those problems with the Mark 6 exploders. None of them worked. And pretty much after that debacle, the Navy pulls out of the Philippines. So they're gone late December, early Christmas. Then you got Louis Brereton. He's the Air Force commander out there. He only arrives about a month before they get there. They've got all these new planes that nobody's flown, the P-40. They're really not prepared for this one. They'll lose half their bomber force of 17 bombers and most of their P-40s in those first days of the war. He too will be hauled out by December of 1941. So within the first month, you've got your main air guy and you've got your main Navy guy that have left. And then you've got MacArthur, who's going to be there. Now, MacArthur had been called back to the colors right before the war. He's the main proponent of, you've got to send something to defend this place out here. He had been saying it for about 6 years, since 35. He's going to be largely ignored. When they start sending everything out there, it's right at the end. And he's going to make a bunch of costly mistakes, in this campaign. And he too will be pulled out. And so when they pull out, then you've got Wainwright, who was the commander of the Northern Luzon force that headed off those beaches, then pulled down in Bataan. He was the first corps commander. And then you've got General King. He was the head of artillery. When MacArthur pulls out, Wainwright will be put in charge of that Luzon area. King will take over Bataan. And then you've got General Sharp, who's down there on those southern islands, Visayan, Mindanao Command. And these are the guys who are going to have to bear that burden of surrender. Of course, you've got General Homa, who is the Japanese general there, 14th Army. He's going to be the face of all these atrocities to America. I mean, he's going to be removed, from command after the campaign's over. They gave him 50 days to do it. It took about 150. He was in disgrace by the Japanese. But even though he's pulled out and relegated to really no command for the rest of the war, he's going to be just the face everybody's looking for afterward. You've got all these forces out there. You've got the Philippine Scouts. These are not Philippine Army. They're U.S. Army. These are top soldiers. You've got engineers, infantry, artillery, everybody else. They are part of the U.S. Army contingent there in the Philippines as well. You've got Filipinos that fight for the U.S. Navy and for the Philippine Navy. You've got U.S. Navy units out there. This one guy is Robert Thompson. He's on the submarine tender Canopus. And a lot of these guys, they're going to be fighting as soldiers on Bataan. That's the same with the Air Corps. You had thousands sent out there. All those planes are lost in the first day. They're all going to become infantry on Bataan. And so basically you've got all these people that have been sent out there at the last minute, as well as that Philippine Army, which is the main proponent of what they're going to work with, that are all unprepared, and they're all going to bear that burden of surrender that comes when the Japanese finally are able to take this out. The 4th Marines, they had come from Shanghai just in the days before, and they're going to be used as beach defense there on Corregidor. They, as well as everyone else, will pretty much go in. The U.S. 31st Infantry Regiment, this was the only all-U.S. infantry regiment out there. You're going to have a lot of tank units, a lot of anti-aircraft units show up before the war begins. These are all American units, but they too are, they don't have the material to be able to fight off the Japanese, and they're all going to go into surrender. Next slide, please. Now, this is the fall of Bataan. The Japanese had landed in early January or December of 1941. They had driven those Filipino recruits basically off the beaches. MacArthur had to go back to that war plan Orange and retreat back to the Bataan Peninsula. The thing is, the U.S. and the Filipinos will fight them to about a standstill. If you look at that one map over there, you can see that last line on the bottom. They'll fight them to a standstill there till about February. But then the Japanese, Singapore's fallen. They're going to bring in about 150 more artillery pieces. They're going to bring in infantry from Shanghai as well as Indochina, and they're going to get the hope to get this thing over with. Basically, Homa thought it would take about 50 days to end the campaign. It's going to take about 5 to end this once they started on April 3rd. On April 3rd, they start bombing and hammering artillery at the 21st, 41st Philippine divisions, and they pretty much scatter them, and then they just push right through. They try to throw in the scouts as well as that 31st Infantry, but they can't hold them back. The Japanese are moving, and everybody on Bataan is pretty much done by that point. The Japanese will break through once they've got Mount Samat. That's the Japanese there holding up the flags. Then they've got the position to really bring everybody under artillery fire, and that's what's going to end it, because nobody can make any kind of stand after that. Once they got Samat, they could pinpoint pretty much everybody on the southern parts of Bataan. At Hospital 2, that was where there was about 4,000 patients at that time. That's what General King is really worried about, because the Japanese are about to push right into that on April 8th. They had pushed the Americans and the Filipinos all the way down on the east coast of Bataan, headed down towards Mariveles and the tip of Bataan. But once they get to where that hospital is, that's when King knows he's got to surrender, and he issues that order to destroy all equipment. Everybody moved to the south end of Bataan, and he's going to have to make that decision on April 9th.
Just a quick question for you, Jim.
Yeah.
You're saying that this campaign is obviously going swifter from the Japanese and the American stroke Filipino point of view, but it's not like there isn't some kind of precedent for this, in the sense that 2 months earlier, Singapore has been and Malaya have been suffering a very, very similar situation. The Japanese sweeping down there faster than anybody expected. So we as historians, we look at all these different campaigns, and we can keep an eye on all of them with our kind of a imaginary post-it note board. But at the time, is there much awareness of what's happening elsewhere, or are they thinking kind of insular and inwards?
You mean as far as what's happening outside of that?
Yeah. I mean, would the Japanese have been, the American defenders, would they have been aware of the swiftness of how quickly Malaya fell, for example?
Yes, they knew it all. They're getting word of all those things happening. I mean, the main thing, the Japanese are really good at what they're doing.
Yeah,
they're really experienced at this. You've got basically, and I'll talk about that later, all these raw Filipino troops that never been there. They tried to defend on the beaches, so they lose most of their food and their medicine, in those first days. And when they get back into Bataan, they're just wiped out. And so when it comes down to that final thing, they're out of food, they're out of medicine, they're out of everything, and that's why it's going to go so fast.
Okay, thanks.
From there on. That final one is that's the 31st Infantry surrendering there in that bottom right corner. 76,000 forces on Bataan are at the surrender. About 11,000 Americans, about 65,000 Filipinos, about 1,000 people are going to make it to Corregidor over that 3-mile gap in the water that's there. You've had about 20,000 civilians that came into Bataan as well, and so the Japanese are coming in expecting to find about 25,000, and all of a sudden you've got 100,000 people there. That are all dying, all starving, all in malaria and everything. And so basically what it is now is, this is the beginning of their nightmare. Either you try to evade it and either sit out the war or become a guerrilla, or, you went into captivity, and this is the beginning of that nightmare for everybody. The next one, please. Now, in that photograph on the left in the foreground, that's Manila Bay Islands of Caballo and Corregidor. And this is where the campaign is focused on now. Because all those, even though Bataan surrenders, all those harbor forts on all those islands that have been built at the turn of the century to keep the navies out and not airplanes, they're going to come under the fire now. Basically, they had, it was known in that War Plan Orange, you had to hold Bataan in order to be able to hold those harbor forts. Because once they get Bataan, they can put artillery up on those heights, and they can just hit everything that's there on Corregidor. So it's only going to be a matter of time, until the Japanese are able to take out that force on those islands. That map there, that's the last map of Bataan. It was held by Master Sergeant Troinovsky. It got sent off to Corregidor. It's one of the things that survives. And if you look at that, you can see how Bataan was split into the First Corps on the left and Second Corps on the right. And the Japanese just pushed through that middle area up top and then came all the way around that eastern edge of Bataan and pushed everybody back to those last lines there at near Caban. That is a diary of Troinovsky. He's the guy that keeps that diary. And his first entry, that's April 9th, the day of surrender. And his first entry is Men of Bataan, because there are just like 1,000 men. They say maybe 1,500 or more get there. These guys have no place to go, and they're pretty much just being put on beach defense anywhere they can. And when the artillery starts, they're wide out in the open. They have nowhere to go whatsoever. And then even on that page, Troinovsky says what's going to happen when the Japanese set up their artillery, and that's basically what happens. Next slide, please. These are Ben Steele pictures, and it kind of depicts what was going on there. The Japanese soldier was fierce and resourceful, and he's embedded in a military caste that's based on a system of brutality and intolerance for weakness. Beatings were commonplace between the commanded and the commanding. It was usually the lowest private who bore the brunt. He's only got one place to look to, pass that on. That's a prisoner of war. And this is the situation you're going to be dealing with. And mainly, the Japanese surrender is a punishable offense by death. I mean, nobody's allowed to surrender. So when all of a sudden 75,000 Americans and Filipinos come out with a surrender, the Japanese have no pity on them. And they are definitely vengeful of all the people they've lost in the campaign, and they're going to be looking for revenge, basically. The Filipinos, these guys were all raw recruits. They are in coconut fiber hats. They're all working with World War I equipment, half of which is defective. They, like the Americans, will be starving down to less than 1,000 calories a day before the end, and they will be as sick as everybody else there come to the end. And then the Americans as well, there was about 23,000 total that were there. 20,000 so will surrender, but less than 3,000 of them had been in the Philippines for more than a month or so. They had all been sent out there at the end, and then within those first 3 months, then they're all in the jungle. So it's basically culture shock for all these people. Mm-hmm. Airmen without airplanes are infantry. The Navy guys are all infantry. They ate all the horses of the 26th Cavalry and the mules by early March. They'll run out of all malaria medicine, quinine, everything else by that part. And so you've got everybody starving. You've got over 75% of the command with dysentery by this point. And General King said, you've got 15% of the soldiers that are effective. That means they can carry their equipment and walk for 100 yards before they have to rest. And so that's why this campaign goes so fast, is because these guys are just completely done after this time. Next slide, please. This is that character, Ben Steele, again. Ben Steele, he was with that Provisional Air Corps Regiment up on the front line. When the Japanese pushed through, they tried to make a hold at the San Vicente River, but that got bored through, and that's when it was just a melee of men and materiel making for the south end of Bataan. Steele got caught up in that. He got captured by a Japanese tank unit, and immediately he's beat up and forced to carry the supplies of one of the Japanese tank members and marched down to Mariveles. So his journey as a slave began right at the beginning, as did most of them. A lot of these guys, first Japanese they meet, they're getting beat up. I mean, Mariveles, when the Japanese came in and started around, within the first 20 minutes, there was a guy with his head chopped off. Everybody knew, that this was not going to be anything that they had ever expected. It's like they said, nobody had ever understood anything like atrocities like they were going to see. Next caption, please. Now, the Japanese had to take Corregidor. They needed to take Corregidor and General Wainwright to secure the surrender of the Philippines. And so that's the main goal. And you've got all these surrendered captives that are now in the way. And so they need to get them out of the peninsula as fast as they can. We talked about them being unprepared. They thought they were going to have about 25,000 troops that they captured, but they've got about 70,000 that are going to come out. About 11,000 Americans and about 65,000 Filipinos are going to be coming out of the jungle. The plan is to put them at this place called Camp O'Donnell, and that is off the map. It's a little bit north of that. And what it is, it's the 65-mile march from Mariveles to San Fernando. San Fernando, they'll get on these trains that'll take them 25 miles up to a town called Capas, and then you've got another 6-mile march to Camp O'Donnell. This is a former 91st Division, Philippine Division cantonment that they're going to use there. The thing is that when the Japanese take all these people, they had set up holding pens, as you can see on those towns on that map, to be able to hold these prisoners, but they are not adequate at all. They don't have the right amount of food. They don't have the right amount of water, and they don't alter the plan at all. And so now it's just moving this mass of men and material north. And the thing is you've got all these communication problems. Nobody can talk. And the main point that the Japanese are going to make is going to be with a rifle butt or a bayonet, and that's how they're going to move these people out of there. Now, the Japanese have put this Major Hisashi Sekaguchi. He's the medical officer. You've got this Colonel Toshimitsu Takatsu. He's supposed to get all the troops from Mariveles up to Balanga. They thought that they could send them all up there without feeding them or giving them water in those first 25 miles. And that's the way this trip's going to be. Nobody's going to get fed. Nobody's going to get water pretty much the whole time. As well, you've got this Major General Yoshitaka Kawane. He's really in charge of the whole thing. He's the guy that picked out Camp O'Donnell to be able to use. All these guys are going to face war crimes, after the war is over. But now you've got about 60,000 that are going to be marching towards Balanga, and some, are the thing is that as the Philippine 93rd or 91st Division is marching across Bataan to get to the east side, they get to what's the Pantingan River, and that's where General Nara's 65th Brigade is coming through, and they run into these guys marching across Bataan to go surrender. They take all the officers, all the non-commissioned officers, and they execute all of them. That's about 300 people. And what they did was they picked people out of each Japanese unit, and the 65th Brigade made them all participate in this. They let all the PFCs walk on, but that showed immediately that violence is on the mind of most people. I mean, some people will get up to O'Donnell and they won't have any problem, but that is a slim minority, because it's just going to be an atrocity-filled affair for most people. The road, that's that picture there. What everybody remembers is the dry season. There's about 7 inches of dust on the road. Everybody immediately turns white. You're breathing in all that dust. You're not getting any water. You are all sick already, and this just makes it 10 times worse. It's nothing but a mass of humanity, with the Japanese going south by truck and the U.S. soldiers and Filipino soldiers being marched north. And the Japanese are hanging out with rifle butts, smacking people in the head. They've made ropes out of whips, or whips out of ropes, and they're, using that on everybody. And this is just not going to be anything that anybody can really understand whatsoever. Like they said, why did they do this to the Filipinos? I mean, if you were sitting there trying to come there and get them to be on your side, you've just ruined it, incredibly. So basically that road, as they're going up there, this just becomes, it all. That's what the death march takes place on. Hospital number 1, that's where that tank is right there. General Matsuobe's tank unit pulled right in front of Hospital 1. He immediately went through the hospital and realized the Americans and Philippines were treating all his captured guys real well. And so he put a guard around that and kind of kept everybody in Hospital 1 from being maltreated. That didn't happen at Hospital 2, though. They pretty much set up all the artillery right there and used them as a shield for it right there. So, I mean, Matsuobe is a person unlike most of the Japanese that most people will encounter. That separation photo with the Filipinos, they'll separate the Filipinos and the Americans on the march. And they march them in squads of about 150 men, 4 abreast, and you've got groups as big as 1,500 with these groups of 150. The Japanese will go across or walk next to them or be on bicycle next to them. They'll trade guards every few miles so that nobody gets an affinity with anybody. And the Japanese are just speedo, get up moving, and if you lag behind, you're going to get shot or you're going to get bayoneted, and people will hear that, the whole time. That they're walking, people getting behind them, trying to tell them not to stop. And they say that people that tried to help the weak, they're the ones that die first. because the Japanese see them trying to help them, and they're going to take it as well. That one picture of Orani kind of displays what you're going to see along the entire death march. Do we know, are those guys asleep or dead? We don't know. That was just a picture taken by the Japanese at that point. And then finally below, the main problem is water. There are artesian wells at every town along the way. The Japanese do not let them stop. Anybody tries to get water out of a creek or anything like that, or these wells, you're going to get shot, you're going to get bayoneted. Everybody talks about walking through towns and there's just a lump of people, dead people there around these wells, but the Japanese will let them drink from carabao wallows. They'll let them drink from the dirty pools on the side, and that's where dysentery just starts going crazy. Everybody's going to get every disease that they can, because they're all just, it's 100 degrees, you've got nothing, your whole mouth is parched from this dust, and you lose it. You're in a stupor now, and you see water, and you're going to go for it. I mean, it's like William Dias, who was one of the toughest guys there was. He said once they got to Orani, which was about 3/4 of the way, he said he doesn't understand anything from then. He was going in and out of consciousness, and that's the way most of these guys were. They was just walking like a zombie trying to get to San Fernando or Capas. The Filipinos will suffer worse than the Americans. They say that maybe 5,000 are killed on the death march, and that's mainly because the Japanese just couldn't understand why this Asian people had gone along with the Americans. They were like, we're the ones that are Asian with you. Why are you? Why did you do this? And whereas about 250, 300 Americans they think will die on the death march, it's probably about 5,000 for the Filipinos. About 10,000 will make it away. They evaporate into the populace as they're making the move along. But that's how many are going to probably go, and they still don't know. I mean, we're left today still trying to figure out who was where, who died in the campaign, who was where, in what camp, things like that. Next slide, please. And these are just scenes of the death march. This is Sam Stensler, Frank Spear, Captain James Gallagher. This is probably one of the most famous pictures of the death march. These guys have their hands tied behind their backs. We know Gallagher gets killed right after. We don't know why they were tied up at that time, but none of these guys will survive the march or the incredible thing there is, the entire captivity experience. Below that, Hospital 2, that was right next to the road that the marchers were on. And the Japanese told 4,000 Filipinos, hey, you can go home. These guys are all wounded and everything. And they start walking on the road. Do any of them make it home? We have no idea, because people were saying they saw all these, patients on the road that were dead by the side of the road. So, I mean, this was, a way to clear out that area without having to really do anything. Up there at the top, that's the sun treatment. They would put them in the middle of, the tarmac, the roads, and sit them there for 3 hours, no water, because everybody who is weak is easier to move. And that below that, that's one of the first pictures of one of those camps that they have at these various rest stops. Now, all those become, there's no latrines. There's thousands of people pumped in there. These become covered with feces and filth, and dysentery just, again, goes crazy. I mean, it's just people dying in these things in the muck there. And when you come into the camp, they're all still dead there. And this is just, the worst experience any of these guys have had. Up there on the top, the shakedown, this is when you first get captured. What do you got? The Japanese are looking for food, pens, wallets, rings, bracelets, anything like that. And if you put up a fight, you're probably going to get clubbed over the head. If you put up too much of a fight, you're probably going to get bayoneted, and that's what a lot of these guys will see throughout there. And this is, all these scenes that Ben Steele drew, they're all from his memory. They're not, oh, somebody told me this, this is what he actually saw. There again, that's a picture of that guy being bayoneted on the death march. Like I said, about 250, 300. But you also have these instances there at the bottom where people are seeing people being buried alive. Filipinos are forced to, bury these guys alive. William Dias saw it. Burt Banks said that he saw 2 Filipinos, being ordered to bury another guy alive. They wouldn't do it. The Japanese killed both of them, and then they come to Bank. Okay, you do it. And he admitted, yeah, I did it. He didn't want to die. And people say, oh, I wouldn't have done that. You don't know what you're going to do until you're in that situation.
I think it's one of those cases, Jim, where sometimes with horrible events in World War II, our understanding of we sort of look back and think maybe they weren't quite as bad as they were. But this actually, it's getting worse and worse, because, as you said, we're adding the Filipino experience, which wasn't perhaps wasn't in the story immediately. It was more the American point of view. So in fact, the horrors of this are increasing with the historiography in some ways.
Yes, yes, and it's just going to get worse. And that's the thing. A lot of these guys will, be someplace and they'll be like, I'm going to go try and get on this work detail. Anywhere's got to be better than this, and it's not.
Wow.
It never gets any better. We'll go on to the next slide.
Okay.
Now the train ride, San Fernando to Capas. Many people will say this is worse than the entire death march itself. They get to San Fernando. You've got about 50,000 people that are coming through that town. They throw them in the cockfighting pit and they throw them in a local jail there while they're waiting for trains to come in. And these places become centers of filth, because nobody's cleaning them during the time. But they say this is the place where you can get food probably more than any other place before going to O'Donnell. The Filipinos, the whole way, have been trying to give these people water, food, rice balls, candy, anything they can. And that's at the threat of being beat to death or, being murdered outright. And then here come the trains. And you can see that car there. It's built to hold maybe about 30 people. These aren't those 40 by 8s from World War I. These are smaller. And they pack 100 people in there. And they've all got dysentery. They've all got malaria. They're all, dehydrated. And they're standing up and they start dying standing up because none of them can sit down because they're packed in so tightly. And, there's no place to go. I mean, the lucky guys are the ones who the guard will open the door and let them rotate around and be able to use the door to go to the bathroom. But that's not on most of them. And, how many die on these trains, we just don't know. That one picture of there is showing it. You're forced in until there's no room for anybody else to get in there, and all of them will make that train trip to Capas, and then they'll have to make that 6-mile march to O'Donnell through that rolling plain. And that one picture, that is the last surviving car, and that is now at the Camp O'Donnell Memorial there in the Philippines. And we'll go to the next slide. Now, Camp O'Donnell, when they disembarked from the trains, the men had to march, through this rolling, treeless grasslands, and that's going to be the main problem. There's no way to get out of the sun, while you're there at Camp O'Donnell. And they say from April 11th to the 25th, 9,000 Americans and about 50,000 Filipinos go into the camp. So about 15,000 Filipinos disappear on that march. We know about 5,000 probably are killed. The other 10,000 probably evade into the backdrop. The Americans, you've had about 1,000 that make their way to Corregidor, and they're all going to head into O'Donnell. It's surrounded by an 8-foot barbed wire fence with guard towers. Had limited unsanitary infrastructure. I think there's some trenches for the latrines, but that's about it. And the thing is everybody rolls into this place. There's no water there. You've got one faucet that feeds the entire camp, and they separate them there. You've got the 9,000 Americans to the north and that camp picture you see there, and you've got all the Filipinos to the south of there. You have one water source that runs through the south. It's polluted, and the Filipinos can't help themselves because they're all starving and dying of thirst. Whereas the Americans have that one line up at the top in their camp that comes in, and the water line there is like a 10-hour wait. But the thing is because there are no infrastructure, no bathroom, facilities, anything like that, the camp, like those other plants, just becomes a holding pen of filth. And then the flies descend, and you've got 1 million bottle flies there. And they said not only could you smell the camp from 5 miles away, but you could hear it because of the hum of the flies that are there the whole time. And then they're in these shacks that are built of bamboo and palm fronds. They're all infested with lice, bed bugs, rats, everything else. And so then the deaths start coming, and you're going to have 27,000 Filipinos die in O'Donnell. And basically the Japanese are going to let them go after this experience. January of 43, they parole all those Filipinos because they were going to kill them all there. Now, the one goofy thing about this is that picture in the middle of that Major John Olson. John Olson said with all those shakedowns that came through, there was no way you could have anything. and he couldn't believe the things that people walked into camp with. And this guy shows up in camp. He's got a full typewriter, he's got a ribbon, and he's got ink for this thing. And, Olson is just, how did you do this? And so for Camp O'Donnell, we have great records of, the Olson kept of all the deaths of the Americans, of all the work details where everybody was sent. Of course, it isn't complete, but it's probably one of the best ones there is. And it was all because of this one guy being able to, somehow, sneak some typewriter in there. That guy on the far right, when the camp got closed at O'Donnell in June of 1942 and sent to Cabanatuan, they finally sent in Duckworth. He had run Hospital 1 on Bataan. He comes in, he gets the situation cleaned up. He gets the death rate, down to nil for the Filipinos, when they start letting them all go. And, a lot of people will hold things against Duckworth, because he was a very brusque type of person, but he saves a lot of people. He really does. Next slide, please. Now, disease and death. We've talked a little bit about this. There's no hospitals at O'Donnell. There's no medicine. There's no anything. There's no blankets. There's no way to clean up anything. Basically, this ward, St. Peter's ward, that's where you go to die. And they put you in there. You're laying in your own filth the whole time. I mean, there's a couple of guys that'll be able to pull themselves out of there, but basically once you get into St. Peter's ward, there's nothing you could do, and there's just people trying to help you. You've got, nobody wants to go in there to work because you're all going to catch dysentery. It's only a lot of the chaplains that will do this work, to go in there and give succor to these people that are all, basically going to die. They brought medical supplies to the camp, but this camp commander, Tsuneyoshi. Now, Tsuneyoshi was like one of the worst people that anybody knows. They said as soon as you came in, you had a diatribe from Tsuneyoshi. Every group that came in had, and basically his whole speech was, all your friends on Bataan, they're the lucky ones. They're all the ones that died. We're at war. This is, it's better if you all just die here. That kind of statements that are coming out from him. But like when the Catholic Charities, as well as the Philippine Red Cross, they come to O'Donnell to give medical supplies, and Tsuneyoshi says no. He's not going to distribute any of them, and this is just going to be a death camp at O'Donnell. 1,500 Americans are going to die there. The water pumped into there was for drinking only. If you tried to wash with it, you got killed. And that's the thing. After the death march, and then months in this camp, you are in the same filth you started with in early January on Bataan, basically, and you're basically living in rags. The thing is, there's these burial parties that they put together. Nobody had any strength to be able to go bury them. It's hard ground. You bury these guys. You take off all their clothes so that everybody else can use their clothes. You can only get about 2 feet down. You have to weigh them down with rocks because the water table will bring them up. And at night, every night, you hear the dogs out there. In this cemetery. 1,500 more Americans are going to be put out in this cemetery. And then the thing is, it basically becomes this biological lab. What happens when you take away all the vitamin B? Everybody starts getting beriberi, wet beriberi, which, you blow up like a balloon, dry beriberi, where everything starts to ache. Vitamin A goes, you lose your sight. That one picture, everybody started wearing these shields over their eyes because of that. And so these people at O'Donnell are just, it is nothing but a death camp, and they are there waiting to die. And it's only because they get moved that any of them will survive this whole thing. Next one, please. Now, Ben Steele, because like I said, he said anywhere's got to be better than this. At O'Donnell, they started sending people to work on cleaning up Bataan. Cleaning up Clark Field. They sent them to bridge details to rebuild bridges that have been blown during the campaign. And a lot of these people will go there. The people that have it best are the guys that drive trucks for the Japanese, because they can, they have the best connections to get food and whatnot, and they'll bring it back into O'Donnell. Same with medicine, but for most of them, it's a lot worse. And a lot of these details, they have the 10-man rule where they bunch groups in 10, and if one escapes, all 10 get murdered. And that happens on one of the bridge details. That'll later be instituted in Cabanatuan as well. But Ben Steele volunteers for this Tayabas Road detail. And this is one of the worst ones that there is. These guys will drive down and to Tayabas. I think it was like 15 trucks took them down there. They immediately have to march through the jungle because the Japanese want to build this road through the jungle. And you're not using any heavy equipment. You're using a shovel, maybe a pick, your hands mostly. And you get put in this camp. That your camp is a rock bed. There's no cover. There's no trees to shade under. It's a rock bed. And Ben Steele, basically, when he went out there, he is from Montana, and he would always make these rock walls around him to guard against snakes, living in Montana. And so when he went there, he did the same thing around where he would sleep on that rock bed. When he went back 50 years later, that rock bed wall was still there.
Wow.
Built there on the thing. 99 guys will die from dysentery there. And there was when they opened up Bilibid, one of the doctors went there and saw a couple of the guys they brought back from Tayabas. He went down there to investigate and was just like, good God, this is, and it was the worst thing that anybody had been through. Next slide, please. Now, once the Japanese have taken Bataan, like I said, they're looking to go after all these harbor forts in Manila Bay. There's probably about 13,000 personnel there, about 8,000 Americans, about 5,000 Filipinos. You had a lot of people that escaped from Bataan. You had all the headquarters people that came from Manila that are all there based in that Malinta tunnel. They're on what they call the Gibraltar of the East. It's got 23 batteries with 56 large guns. It's got these 3 12-inch mortar batteries. That's just on Corregidor, but all of it's obsolete. I mean, you've got one Fort Drum, which I'll show. That's probably the only modern weapon system out there. On Corregidor, you've got 2 guns out of those 56 that are modern weapons. Basically, this had been built for seaward defense. This was not anything built. It was built before the days of air power because of those treaties, Washington, London naval treaties of the 1920s. They weren't able to build anything out there, increase their defensives. If you look at that one picture of Malinta Hospital, that's in Malinta Tunnel. That was only built out there in 1932 because the guy who ran the Philippine Corregidor Coast Artillery units, he started directing all this money to build that. That wasn't like a government project. It was like, we're going to build this on our own because he knew that they were going to need that eventually. And it did. It withstood anything the Japanese could throw with them. That mile-long barracks, that's on top side. If you look at the Corregidor, it's kind of like a tadpole, top side, bottom side, middle side. Bottom side's where all those dwarfs are, and then Malinta is right in that Malinta Hill in Malinta Tunnel, and that's where the hospital is there, and they can hold about 1,000 patients. Next slide. Now, this is Fort Drum. This is that most modern facility that's there in the Philippines. You've got batteries, Marshall and Wilson. These are both 14-inch guns that are on this thing. You've got a desalinization plant in Fort Drum that can desalinate about 5,000 gallons a day. This is the most up-to-date piece. You've got Battery E of the 59th Coast Artillery running this. Thing is, this thing had been finished in 1917. They immediately closed it down and didn't reopen it until the late 1930s. And that's when this guy, Lewis Kirkpatrick, comes in there. Now, during the campaign, it had about 15 inches of concrete blown off that top deck, because it was just getting hammered the whole time, but they can't penetrate it. When the Japanese finally do invade Corregidor, this gun battery is just, it destroyed that first wave of Japanese that came in. And your commander was this guy, Lewis Kirkpatrick. Now, when the surrender order came, he didn't want to surrender. He told people later on, he talked to all the crew. They were going to hold out. They could have held out for probably about 6 more months, kept Manila Bay closed. But when Corregidor surrendered and they had that problem with all the POWs there, Kirkpatrick was forced to surrender and regretted it pretty much the entire time. Next slide. Now you've got these other harbor forts, and these are smaller than the other ones, but they too are filled with 14-inch guns, 10-inch guns, 12-inch guns, and they've got these batteries of mortars as well that will all play into the campaign, especially with that last move. Next slide. That's Fort Frank. That's right there off the southern coast of the Manila Bay. It too is right close, and they hold out until the end, as all these forts do. But they're basically holed up inside of whatever they can be holed up in, because once that artillery starts, that's going to be it. And the next slide, we should be on General Wainwright surrenders the Philippines. Yep. Okay. Now, in April 12th, 1942, air power and artillery really began pulverizing Fort Mills Corregidor. And after about a month of bombardment, the Japanese infantry invaded. Now, the beach defenses, they inflicted heavy casualties while that last batteries on Corregidor fought until they were both silenced by that artillery fire coming from Bataan. And then on the second wave, the Japanese landed about 3 tanks and a bunch of artillery. And they were able to then, because all the artillery on Corregidor is then destroyed, they are able to move through with about 1,000 casualties, and they get through those Marines of the 2nd Battalion, and they're poised on May 6th to start firing right into Malenta Tunnel. And that's when Wainwright knows he's going to have to do it. Now, the beach defense have been run by Sam Howard's Marines there, Sato's 61st Japanese Infantry, same guys that took Mount Samat. These are, the shock troops of the Japanese. They'll invade Corregidor and overwhelm those defenses. That one picture is a propaganda photo of them ripping down the flag. And what that was before that had come down, MacArthur's classmate from 1903, a guy named Paul Bunker. He was serving there on Corregidor, and he ripped the flag down, and they tore it up and gave it to different people. And he dies in prison camp, this Paul Bunker guy, in Taiwan about 43, and he gives that piece to somebody else. It's in the West Point Museum right now. The nurses were there. On Bataan, there was 88 nurses. They got them all off the night before surrender. They were there working in the Corregidor Hospital. They flew out a bunch on PBYs that got down to Mindanao Island, but then the plane hit a rock on Lake Lanao, and they all get stuck there on Mindanao. The thing is, the Japanese didn't know what to do with the nurses. They're like, you're not military, even though they were all Army and Navy nurses, and they sent them to the civilian camps. I don't cover that in this program because we'd take about 2 more hours, but all the civilians in the Philippines, all those allied civilians, they get locked up in Manila, Santo Tomas, and up at Camp Holmes and Baguio, and all those nurses are going to go in with the civilian internees there. Finally, Wainwright, that morning when he goes out to surrender, there's a Lieutenant Uramura from the 61st Infantry there right outside Malenta Tunnel. And Wainwright says, I'm just surrendering the harbor forts. I don't have any authority, because when MacArthur left, he put Wainwright just in charge of harbor forts and, that Luzon area. But the Washington said, no, you're in charge. And so the Japanese know that. So when they show up, Wainwright tries to go back to what MacArthur said, and they said, nope, you surrender all the Philippines or else we're going back to war, and all your guys are disarmed now, and they will all be killed in this battle. And so that's what Wainwright has to face. He goes to meet Homa at Cab Cabin and tells him the same thing, I can't surrender. And then Homa's like, well, I can't do anything for you. War's going to start up again here in the next couple of hours. They send Wainwright back to Corregidor. He finally says, I got to surrender, because of all these 13,000. And what he'll do, he's going to send his aide Trawick down to Mindanao, because when MacArthur had gone through Mindanao on the way to Australia, he told Sharp, head of assignment, everybody goes guerrilla. When the surrender comes, you guys all go up in the mountains and hold out, as long as you can. But Wainwright sends Trawick down there. He says, look, if you don't surrender down here, these 13,000 guys on Corregidor are all going to be massacred. And that's why Kirkpatrick on Fort Drum surrendered as well, because he knew what was going to happen. And now Thomas Kalakuka, and that's that last picture there. He was he was wearing the quartermaster point, and Wainwright sent him north to tell all those guys up on Baguio to surrender. He doesn't make it, and Wainwright will never see him again. He dies en route. They think he gets buried up there around the Tarlac area. Next slide, please. Once the Japanese had taken Corregidor, they made everybody move down to that western entrance of Malenta Tunnel. That's where they took all those propaganda photos. And then they sent them down to the 92nd Garage area, which is at the tail end of Corregidor. And if you look at that one picture up on the top, you can see towards the tail, that's taken from topside, looking towards Malenta Hill. Right behind Malenta Hill is where that beach was that they jump everybody in. That's a more modern picture of it, that 92nd Garage area. But they dumped all 13,000 there. And once again, there's no food. There's one pipe that comes in. Everything automatically becomes the latrine. Nobody takes organization. The officers, the seniors have gone. They're all separated again. And it's not until a couple of the officers finally say, we have to take control of this situation because this is our only water source and we're about to lose it. The thing is there are all these people on work details going out, burying people, removing scrap for the Japanese, and they'll bring back food, things that they can use there. But they are going to be there for about 3 weeks, the 13,000 there on the beach. And then finally, they'll about May 24th, 3 freighters will come pick up them as well as the Filipinos there. And they're going to be taken to Manila. They'll drop them off at Pasay, which is the town right below Manila. They drop them off in chest-deep water, make them walk ashore, and then they make them walk the 5 miles to what they call Bilibid Prison. And they're trying to humiliate them in front of the Filipinos. You know, look at your great American allies. Now they've been defeated. All it did was made that cement that bond between the Filipinos and the Americans even more. The one guy up top, I show him, Edgar Whitcomb. He was on Bataan, and he tried to swim to Corregidor. A rowboat picked him up, and he got rowed to Corregidor. When the surrender came on Corregidor, he's like, I'm not staying here. He swam back to Bataan, 3 miles. He pretends to be a civilian. He gets picked up by the Japanese, says, I'm a civilian engineer, you know, and they put him in Fort Santiago, this the torture place of the Kempeitai, the Japanese military police. They torture him. He doesn't say anything, and they put him in the civilian camp at Santa Tomas. Within 3 months, he's on an exchange ship, and he goes back to the United States. You know, he became governor of Indiana later in his life. And this is, you know, one of these, you know, everybody's got $1 million story. Wickham, you know, crazy. Next slide, please. Now, all those senior officers, they're going to be withdrawn, sent out to China. After that Bataan campaign, all those senior officers from Bataan, they come into Camp O'Donnell, and they go through the experience up until, you know, until Corregidor surrenders, and they are there with everybody. King will always say, this isn't on any of you. This is all my fault. You know, King will always think he's going to be court-martialed like Wainwright does, and mainly because King was under orders not to surrender. And, you know, it came down to all those people coming into the hospital, and he knew, if I don't surrender, all these people are going to be killed. And I always say, every descendant of a Bataan Corregidor veteran, they owe their life to General King, because if he hadn't done that, none of those people would have survived. You know, they would have been in Alamo. They would have all died there. And, you know, it's really, really because of him that any descendants are there whatsoever. Wainwright, after he made that surrender on Corregidor, he was whisked off the island. He was taken to Manila. He had to give the broadcast over the thing. MacArthur would say he was coerced, said he was out of his mind, you know, that no way would he have done that. But Wainwright knew if he didn't do it, 13,000 of his men were going to die there on Corregidor. And so they put him up in a hotel in Manila until he can watch that all of his men being paraded down Manila, you know, Dewey Boulevard to go to Bilibid, and then they'll haul him up to an area called Tarlac, which is right in the middle of Luzon. That's where all the senior officers will gather, about 150 of them, and they'll be moved out of the Philippines in August of 1942. You know, 95% of those guys will survive their enslavement, but even Wainwright's going to take a beating. You know, I mean, none of these guys are going to escape it. They'll go to Taiwan and eventually be sent up there into Manchuria. Next slide, please. Now, this is Bilibid Penitentiary, and this is where all those guys from Corregidor are taken, and they're all dumped in this. It's a 19th century style spoke wheel prison. It was made by the Spanish in 1865. It's about 600 feet by 600 feet. The main entrance is on the south, right where we're looking at. That's where the Japanese administration building it is. One side, there's 18 cell blocks that surround it. They're about 150 feet by 20 feet. That's where all these guys are going to be put inside. Half of the camp is used as a POW camp. The other half is a Japanese Kempeitai military prison. This is the most tedious of all the prisons because you can't really see the sky or anything, and you're just pretty much lumped in there watching the days go by within this. There's an old 3-story hospital that was at the back. The thing is this had been closed down right before the war because it was just unusable. It was so old and everything. And they had built a new facility down in a place called Muntinlupa, but the Japanese, they opened it back up. You know, and they put them in there. It's got very good water. They've got showers there, but there's no food like anywhere else. And it's got a really bad latrine system that that overflows whenever it rains there. This is going to be the way station as well of all those prisoners. That anywhere they go to somewhere else on the island or somewhere else in the islands, or when they go to Japan, they'll all come through there. 10,000 are going to roll through there in 1944. Next slide, please. Now, on May 24th, those 8,000 and 5,000 Filipinos captured on Corregidor, they were all marched into Bilibid. And Bilibid was run by the Naval Hospital staff from Canyacao. This was on the south side of Manila Bay. There was American naval base called Cavite, and that's where all these U.S. naval officers were in the hospital. When the war started, there Cavite was destroyed. They moved into Manila. They're all captured in Manila. The Japanese throw them into Bilibid, and they'll become the hospital staff. And this becomes like hospital, military camp number 3, but it's like the hospital for all the prisoners in the islands. They can't do any major surgeries. They can do minor things. They have no medicine there, basically. It all has to come from the outside. It's not until Corregidor surrenders in May that they get all those Corregidor hospital people, and they're able to smuggle in all the equipment they surgical instruments and malaria medicine, things like that, to be able to have something to actually work with. The main gate, after that humiliation march, this is where they all went through. Now, there's one guy, Andre Carson. This kind of explains everybody's situation. He was on Fort Drum. As soon as he got in that march going to Bilibid, he lost the guys he was with. He lost his commanding officer. And he immediately knew he was on his own for the rest of this thing, because he doesn't see any of them, for like the next, because when you get into Bilibid, there's all of a sudden, 18,000 or 13,000 guys in there, and he can't find them. He finds a place to sleep. He wakes up the next morning, found out he was in the execution chamber, that they used to use there. But within a few weeks, a few days, most of these guys are going to be moved out to the new camp at Cabanatuan. That one place shows what the cell blocks were like inside. They would hold about 250 people in there. This is a misleading photo. This is taken in 45 after the liberation. You can see there are beds in there. There was no beds, in there whatsoever. The Silliphant diary. Silliphant was a doctor there. He was one of that Cabanatuan staff. He'll stay there the whole time there at Bilibid. He'll be liberated there. But like anybody else, if you get caught with a diary, you're gonna get killed. So he's risking his whole life the whole time to have that. This is the Bilibid staff, showing all that naval staff there. The first guy that ran the camp was a guy named Lee B. Sarton. He's a commander in the Navy, and he's a very vocal person. If he doesn't like what the Japanese are doing, he's going to tell them. And so by 43, they ship him out to Cabanatuan, thinking we'll ship him there and he'll die. He gets rescued at Cabanatuan. Then they bring in this guy, Thomas Hayes, another Navy commander. Hayes totally hates the Japanese. I mean, he writes this book where he says that in Bilibid, you've got a lot of people helping the Japanese. These are Americans. And he'll say, that a lot of Americans are like, that guy ain't going to make it home. And that's the way a lot of them look at it. They look at these Japanese. He's never going to go home. As soon as this war's over, he's done, and that's what Hayes puts in there. And he's a guy who will run the camp until December of 1944, when he's pulled out to go to Japan. And then this guy, Warren Wilson, will come in and take over. Finally, that bottom right corner, Ralph Hibbs was a surgeon with the 31st Infantry, and he missed the death march because when the surrender happened, he was at Hospital 1, and he stayed there with all those patients. That that Matsuobe guy came in there with that tank unit. Early June, they move out to Bilibid, and he goes into Bilibid Prison. Now, before the war, he had dated this girl named Pilar Campos, and Pilar finds him in Bilibid, and she starts smuggling in money, medicine to all these different, to Ralph Hibbs, all these different people. And, that's the way a lot of these guys survived. There's this lady named Nancy Bell Norton. She was like 82. The Japanese never bothered her. She was sneaking in all kinds of medicine into Bilibid because she's allowed to meet this one William Watrous, who's an eye doctor there. And the Japanese never bother her. And so these, these people become these angels of Bilibid. When Ralph Hibbs is moved to Cabanatuan, Pilar Campos finds him there and starts smuggling in stuff there. And he doesn't hear from her again. After the war, he gets liberated at Cabanatuan. He goes to find her. He finds out she got murdered by the Japanese in the battle for Manila. Next slide, please. Now, in about July of 1942, they brought all those Tayabas Road survivors there. Like I said, about 99 of them died there. When they get there, Silliphant, Hayes, all these doctors said they had never seen anybody sicker in their lives. None of them can walk. They've all got parasites. They've all got every disease imaginable. They've got oozing sores. Their mouths are all, it's just the worst bunch that they've ever seen. Now, Ben Steele comes in. He starts bloating up from beriberi so bad he becomes like this balloon. And they think he's going to die. They read him the rights 3 times. This father, William Cummins, that guy right above that picture, he's the guy who invented that phrase, there's no atheists in foxholes. And he takes care of Steele. And like they have the rudimentary, things they can do, like feeding them ashes to like end, dysentery, things like that. And he'll do all this stuff for Steele and get him back down to where he survives. And Steele will start, like I said, etching in the gravel certain pictures. And this other guy, John Duffy, also a chaplain, he was on the death march, got bayoneted, left there, and made it away with this guy named Blair Robinet. Robinet joined the communist Huck guerrillas, and Duffy got recaptured later, but he noticed Steele drawing. So he starts getting him pens, pencils, and has him draw. And they say, you draw all the scenes of camp. You draw all the scenes of what the Japanese are doing to us. And then Duffy kept him in his kit bag. Thing is, Duffy got sent off on one of these Hellships that got sunk later on, lost all the drawings. And so, like I said, Steele will spend the rest of his life, making these drawings.
And do you think this, the keeping of diaries and the creating of sketches is part of that defiance that really keeps these guys alive? We did a show about Shangi with Liz Cowan a few weeks ago, and the importance of the chapel they created, the importance of doing anything that's sort of underground and defiant. It's just the smallest thing can create a bond and a togetherness and a focus. I'm assuming the same applies here.
I would agree completely. And it's what you can get away with that are those little victories. It's like with the names of the guards. They're not introduced to these guards, so they make names for them. And like at Cabanatuan, they have this one guy they call Donald Duck. And he doesn't and that's a way to get back at him. Calling him Donald Duck. Finally, he finds out what Donald Duck is, and the next guy that calls him that, gets beaten to within the inches of his life. So yes, I would say it's all about that defiance, that little, victory that's keeping you, hanging on, basically.
Thank you.
Yeah, Steele was lucky that he survived. That cross there next to him, that's that brave, gallant commander of Fort Drum, Lewis Kirkpatrick. He had gone to Corregidor on a work detail, and he caught pneumonia there, and they sent him to Bilibid, and he died of pneumonia and got buried near the east wall there of Bilibid Prison. Next slide, please. Cabanatuan. Now, following the arrival of all those Corregidor prisoners at Bilibid, the Japanese immediately started sending 1,500-man drafts to this place called Cabanatuan. This also was a former Philippine Army cantonment that they had used to, train soldiers with. And it's a 3-camp complex there, and they'll start sending these drafts to Camp 3. Camp 3 is about 24 miles away from Cabanatuan. Camp 2 is about 18 miles. Camp 1 is about 6 miles. So they have to march there. The thing is, the Japanese aren't beating people at this point. If you fell out, you got put in a truck and you got taken to Cabanatuan. But they throw them all in there. Now, the first 4 drafts, they go to Cabanatuan number 3. The last draft goes to Cabanatuan number 2, but there's no water there. And so they move all them to camp number 1, which has, like O'Donnell, 1 spigot. And 2 will never be used. A couple of days after those first guys from Bilibid, who get to Cabanatuan, they move in all those O'Donnell people. Now, the Corregidor guys all got to keep all their stuff. They got to keep their mess kits. They got to keep their musette bags, all the things that they had with them. And so when they get into Corregidor or into Cabanatuan, they're all in pretty good shape. And then here comes all these skeletons, yellow-eyed, people from Bataan. And they're like, what happened? What did you all go through? But they also start looking at them, as like, can you help me out? And it's like, it's a burden to these Corregidor guys because they're doing everything they can to survive now. And seeing these guys from Bataan, they know they have to hold on to every piece of medicine they have, every dollar they have, because they know immediately that they're going to have to survive these camps. Now, they'll start to put out all these men into details, work details. And a lot of these guys will sign up to go to Japan as well as to a work detail down in Mindanao. And then as well, when you got into Cabanatuan, you were going to lose about 2,500 more Americans. The Filipinos have all gone home. They'll all go home by January of 43 from O'Donnell. But all those guys that move into Cabanatuan, they're all still suffering from that death march and the whole O'Donnell experience. And they'll start dropping like flies there. And when you move out these 1,000 people down to Mindanao, another 1,000 that are going to go to Japan, suddenly that Camp 1 camp becomes very empty. And they'll move all those guys from Camp 3 into Camp 1, and they'll combine everything there. Now, the head of the camp is this guy named Captain Shigeji Mori, and everybody there believes he's the Japanese that ran the bicycle shop in Manila before the war. It's never proven. Most everybody will swear to their grave that it was him. Others will say that no, it wasn't him. But this guy, he doesn't, he's kind of like Tsuneyoshi before. They don't allow any medicine or any kind of things coming there. Food's a little better there, water's a little better there at Cabanatuan, but still that death rate is going to be through the roof. Now, once they move all those people on those work details away, and you've lost all these people in those first 4 months at Cabanatuan, then they combine those camps and they put this guy Curtis Beecher in charge. He's that guy that's down there on the bottom left. He had run that 2nd Battalion that defeated the first wave of the Japanese invading Corregidor. And he's a pretty hardcore guy, pretty tough guy. And when they put him in, everybody into that Cabanatuan 1 camp, he comes in, he immediately finds somebody that can build a septic tank. And these guys get to work. They build a septic tank out of nothing. And that cleans up the problem with all the disease, that's going through there. And then as well, that's when your first Red Cross package comes in. It's about December, Christmas of 1942. And this is what's going to end the death rampage there, cleaning up that septic system, trying to get on a campaign to get rid of all the flies. And then you've got these Red Cross packages. Now, Red Cross package is about 11 pounds of food, all these vitamins that can keep these people alive. And that's the thing. The Japanese, all they had to do was fix the latrine, and you could have ended all those deaths at Cabanatuan and O'Donnell. If you had given them a little bit more food, they would have been able to end all these problems like dysentery and beriberi and everything that happened, but they don't. And it's with these 11 pounds of food that come in that you're going to have a lot of these people finally get out. And plus, most of those guys from the death march are already gone. In Germany, you got one of those a week, an 11-pound pack of food if you're a prisoner of war. In Japan, you get 3 of them the whole time you're there, if that.
Crazy. So
this is what's going to keep them alive. The Beecher coming in and getting a hold of the situation, those Red Cross packages that come there. And finally, they'll start registering the Americans. They had talks before where on Bataan, they were like, where's the tunnel to Corregidor? That was the main thing the Japanese wanted. There's no tunnel to Corregidor, but they figured there had to be as well. They wanted to know about the Norden bomb site, which nobody there knows anything about. So they had done all these interviews, but they finally register them there at Cabanatuan. They had just called them captives before. You're not prisoners of war, you're captives. Now they register them. There's a lot of theories about why the Japanese did that, trying to say that, we never had that many in our captivity. But the thing is, they get them all arrested. This one here, this is this Lieutenant Jack Ellis. Ellis is going to die on a Hellship that goes to Japan later on. And this is something that people use to write on the back later on, any kind of, paper that they had, people would use. The Carabao detail. Now, this is the way they get information in and out of Cabanatuan. You have a lot of these groups. You've probably heard of Claire High Pockets Phillips, Miss Utensky, these people that are funneling in supplies and medicine into the camp. They have this girl, Naomi Flores, that sits outside of first O'Donnell, then Cabanatuan. She meets these people, this guy Threat and another prisoner inside as well. You have this guy named Ted Lewin. He owned a nightclub, out in Manila before the war, but he joined the forces on Bataan, is made a prisoner of war. He's got total connections outside, and he'll start working with them. But by 1944, the secret police, they bust this thing wide open. That guy Schwartz there, he was the surgeon at Hospital 1, and Schwartz, he had been part of this group that was getting information. They lock him in a hot box with all these other people for about 4 months. And just to make it as aggravating as possible, they'll arrest Claire Phillips, a lot of these other people. Musa Tagui gets, murdered by the Japanese. And so that's how that whole ring got brought down. But that had been the main supply line to get in, information as well as all the medicine that comes in. And next slide, please. Now, Cabanatuan #1, that's what this photo is. That's that main camp that they'll use, after they combine all the camps. The side that you're looking at is the prisoner side, and on the right side was the Japanese guard side. It's basically just a 8-foot high wire fence that goes around it, and you've got pillboxes all on the eastern side in case there's any kind of problem. That's what the huts look like there. It's about 150 by 20 feet, and it's meant for about 40 Filipinos. You'll pack 200 Americans in there at the time. And next slide, please. Now, guards and prisoners, and this we touched on this a little bit before. This one picture, now this is the 60th Coast Artillery officers there on Corregidor in pre-war, and the guy second from the right sitting, that's a guy named Howard Breithaupt. Now, when about July of 1942, he hooked up with this guy Lloyd Biggs, who was another 59th Coast Artillery or 91st Coast Artillery, which was a Philippine Scouts Coast Artillery, and this guy Lieutenant Gilbert, and they put together a plan to escape from Cabanatuan. Thing is right before that, they had instigated that rule of bringing 10 people together, and if one escapes, all 10 will get killed. But they still went for it. As well, they had created an interior guide by the Americans, because the Americans didn't want everybody getting slaughtered because some guy goes out without telling everybody else. And so Biggs and Gilbert and Breithaupt try to sneak under the wire. One of those American guards catches them and says, "Come on, let's go back in, before anything happens." Biggs is out of his mind, screaming at this American guard, still wanting to make the run, whereas this guy was trying to keep him quiet. And that attracts the Japanese. And the Japanese come over, figure out what's going on. They take him into Shigeji Mori's headquarters. They beat him senseless. They bring him outside. They tie him to posts out front, and they start beating him with 2x4s. Anybody going by the camp commander's office is right there. If you're a civilian, you are ordered to beat the prisoners. And if you don't beat them hard enough, then you're going to get beat yourself. These are Filipinos, that have to do this. A typhoon rolls through the camp. They keep them tied up out there until finally the next day they beat him senseless and knock out Gilbert's eye. It's just, and everybody sees this. And then finally Biggs is like, "You all are going to pay for this." And no, the Japanese take him out and they execute them all. There right outside. Everybody watches this happen. This is one of a couple of instances of this. That picture right below, this is Arthur MacArthur's 4th birthday on Corregidor, and the guy second from left, that's Robert Huffcutt. Now, he was with the State Department group that's there with Sayer, who's a high commissioner, and he could have gone out by submarine, but he felt guilty and he stayed with the guys on Corregidor. He goes into camp at Cabanatuan, got too close to the wire, and they shot him, for nothing. It's basically, the dead wire, like you hear the stories of. Up at the top, that's what they call Joe the Indian. Many stories about this guy. They never, there was like 95 American Indians that came with that 200th Coast Artillery, which was all from New Mexico. Now, Joe escaped and got out. Now, he's dark-skinned. He could have probably lived out with the Filipinos, the entire time and never been noticed. But he knew that all his buddies he left were going to catch it. And so he came back to camp, and they put a sign on him, and which said, "I escaped," humiliated for about a month. And then they take him out and they make him dig his trench and they shoot him. This is things that are going on pretty much all the time. You've got these, main, episodes that happen. Now, this guard in the middle, it's mostly Korean and Formosan guards. You're going to have Japanese overseers. But there was one time at Cabanatuan when about 200 of these brand new guards came in, and the Americans can watch their training, and the Japanese are just beating them senseless. They're the next step under them, and they just catch it. And the Americans watch this just knowing, man, we're next. This is all coming to us next. And then we get to that final picture, the bottom right, one of Ben Steele's drawings. The farm was where everybody worked at Cabanatuan. It's about a 600-acre farm where they're growing everything. You go in there, you got these people named Big Speedo, Little Speedo, Ihara, Air Raid, which they call him, and the other one, Donald Duck, which we talked about. These guys don't know these people, so they just make up names for them. Now, Big Speedo was about the toughest guy they knew. He was hard on the prisoners. He made them work, but he would give you cigarettes. He'd give you a rest break. Whereas Little Speedo was a guy from Formosa, and to look good to the Japanese, his thing was to beat up prisoners, to within inches of their life. Till finally Big Speedo had enough and beat this guy up to within inches of his life. Air Raid, this guy Ihara, their favorite thing to do was come up behind a prisoner that was working, picking weeds, and try to knock the hat off his head without hitting his head. And little did they care if they hit their head. How many concussions they actually caused, we don't really know. but that's what you were dealing with, you know. And it was just one day a guy could be totally nice to you, and you go back to him the next day thinking, you know, okay, this guy I've gotten to getting to know, and he beats the, you know, living daylights out of you. It's just, you know, nothing really makes sense. All right, next one. Now this is getting into the point where they start moving prisoners to all the other places. This shows where all the camps are in the Philippines. Luzon is that upper island. It's the biggest one. That's where Cabanatuan, O'Donnell, where all the civilians are going to be held. Then you've got the Visayan Islands. Palawan mainly is another big one with the airstrip there. But most people are on Luzon. In October, that's when they moved those 5,000 guys down to Mindanao. Which is where they are going to be at the place called the Davao Penal Colony there. They had moved out on October 26th, and they get to Davao about November 6th, and there they are marched into the camp about 17 miles from this place called Lasang. And the Major Maeda, who's head of the camp, he's like, I asked him to send me workers, not skeletons, you know, because these guys can't make a 17-mile march. They're having to pick all them up. It's going to take a little while to even get them to where they're capable of working at all. Mindanao is most of it's unexplored territory at that time. It's got the highest mountain peaks, jungle, pretty much all the way through. And this is going to be the kingdom for all the guerrillas, basically, that are going to be cropping up, all these unsurrendered that are going to make their way out. Next slide, please. Now, one of the guys, Ray Hunt, said that the greatest detriment to the greater co-East prosperity sphere was the Japanese themselves, because they showed up and started slapping all the civilians around, you know, and they're basically trying to say that, you know, Asia for the Asiatics, you know, really it's, you know, Asia for you under our rule, which is going to be the way it is now. This one picture is Homa and Vargas. Now, Vargas was an aide to Quezon, who was the president of the Philippines, and he's the guy who's left there to deal with the Japanese as they come in. When MacArthur and Quezon go to Corregidor on Christmas Eve of 1941. Now, like all politicians, he's going to claim that he just did, you know, what he could to lessen the evil against the Philippine people. You know, there's a lot of people that are going along with that. A lot of people will say, no, you're all just strict collaborators. Lieutenant General Homa, he left the Philippines in about August of 1942 and soon got retired by the Army. The thing is right before he left, he gave this speech. And he tried to, you know, draw the tie between Japan and the Philippines. How, you know, you shouldn't listen to the Americans. You know, they were nothing but horrible for you. You know, but his words just made no sense. You know, after 5,000 to 10,000 Filipinos were murdered on the death march, and then 27,000, you know, die in these camps. I mean, it was just ludicrous and totally not based on reality. You know, him making this speech at that end point right before he goes. Now, this other picture, this Nobuhiko Jimbo and Rojas. Now, Rojas was handpicked by Quezon to be the next president of the Philippines. And he had ended up on Mindanao, working down, had left Corregidor and gotten down there. They were working with the last holdouts there, General Fort, as well as General Sharp. And he got captured. Now, all of a sudden, he gets an order from Manila to make Rojas work with the Philippine government or execute him. And Jimbo says, we can't execute him. This guy is the future of the Philippines. You know, he knows what Rojas is. And so he goes to the higher ups to figure out what this order is about. And when it gets to Homa, Homa's like, I didn't give that order. You know, who's doing this? And that brings us over to Masanobu Tsuji. Now, most people who know this name, and he's a very shadowy figure. He had been associated with the massacres in Singapore of all those civilians after the war. And then after the campaign on the Philippines, right when the death march is beginning, all of a sudden he shows up in the Philippines, sent there by General Sugiyama, who is Homa's director. And a lot of people say that Tsuji is going behind everybody, you know, Homa and everybody else saying, you know, make it as hard as you can on these people. You know, we need to show that we are the masters of this area. And then they believe that one of the, you know, you just interviewed Desiree Benipayo the other day. Now, her great uncle, I believe, was Jose Aban Santos, who was murdered by the Japanese. He was the Chief Justice of the Philippines. And they think that Tsuji issued the order for his murder, you know, but nobody can really figure out what is up with this guy, because after the war, he becomes an agent of the Allies, an intelligence agent against the Soviets. And so they really never can figure out. I mean, there's been a book by Ian Ward, The Killer That They Called God, but he is the most mysterious. And whereas all these other people will face war crimes trials afterward, they don't touch him, whatsoever. Finally, this is a leaflet that's put out by the Negros guerrillas. And in October of 43, Laurel, the president of the Philippines, offered amnesty to anybody that would turn themselves in, guerrillas or holdouts. And this shows that, the aid from the Americans are coming. You can be part of Laurel's, amnesty, but you're just going to find death behind that door. And this is a very effective piece that they're going to use. Next one, please. Now, the Davao Penal Colony was part of that Philippine Bureau of Correction system. In October of 42, the Japanese sent those 1,000 men from Mindanao, from Cabanatuan down to Mindanao, and put them in this Davao Penal Colony. It's surrounded for dozens of miles by impenetrable jungle, and escape was considered impossible. But 10 men that came down from Cabanatuan, they did just that, along with 2 Filipino convicts that helped them. Traversing the jungle, they met Filipinos that were part of the guerrilla movement. They then, in turn, got them to the head American on the island, and there just happened to be 2 agents from MacArthur's headquarters at that time that were there, and they worked to get them off the island. 3 of these escapees go to Australia by submarine and then to the United States. And their story of the Death March, Corregidor, Camp O'Donnell is the first that MacArthur or any Americans are going to hear about what had happened in the Philippines. No word is coming out of there whatsoever. These guys that had sailed to Australia from the Philippines after the fall, none of them had seen, anything with these camps or anything. So these are the guys that are going to bring the word to America about what the Death March, Camp O'Donnell, Cabanatuan, all these different places. Now, that picture right under him, this is Major General Sharp after he surrendered Mindanao. He was going to go guerrilla like he had talked with MacArthur, but then Trawick had come down from Wainwright and told him that you had to surrender. Now, these guys had all been in Kasiyasing, which is a prison camp there in Malaybalay. There's another one in Don Salon. But they've got plenty of water. They got plenty of food. They're able to keep all their stuff. They aren't experiencing anything like went on in Luzon. And so when all of a sudden they're marched out of Malaybalay, get put on a ship, go down to Mindanao, and here shows up all these people from Luzon, they're just like, oh boy, like the same thing Cabanatuan guys have seen. But the thing is all these guys from Cabanatuan, they're all experienced in survival. And all these guys from Mindanao all of a sudden find themselves tricked out of mess kits, tricked out of money, tricked out of food. These guys know what they're doing. And these guys from Mindanao, they get a lesson real quick on how they better start shaping up and figuring out how to survive, or these Cabanatuan guys are going to take them for everything they got. Now, when those guys in April of 1944, they had that 10-man rule. They were able to all get on the same detail working on the coffee plantation, and they were able to. There was these 3 different groups of officers, but they enlisted these 2 enlisted guys to be part of the group because the one guy was so skinny he could sneak into the chicken coop, and he said they ate about 133 chickens before they made the escape because they knew they were going to need the supplies. They make it out. They get into the jungle. Those guides lead them out through the swamps, for miles and miles. They finally run into this guy, Claro Loretta, that picture there. Loretta runs the 130th Guerrilla Regiment, and he forwards them on to those Americans there. Ferdig, this guy Wendell Ferdig, as well as the 2 agents. That's a picture of those escapees up there at the top right. This was taken by a camera that this guy Chick Parsons had. He's one of those agents that comes there. This shows Dias, McCoy, Melnick, and the 2 agents there, Parsons and Charlie Smith, the guys that had come in. But that guy on the right, Leo Bolins. Now all these guys, they get on a submarine and get out of the Philippines and get back to Australia. Bolins doesn't want to go. He wants to stay there and help the guerrillas. He should have left because a year later he's going to get killed by a sniper while working on the airfield there in the Philippines. Now, these guys make it to Australia. MacArthur immediately has them in his office. This is the first he's heard about anything, the Death March. and he's just livid, you know, and just sitting there with pressed lips. And when it comes to the end, he's like, they are going to pay for this. And that one piece there, as soon as that interview was over, he wanted to know who this Biggs, Breithaupt, and Gilbert were, those guys that got, you know, executed at Cabanatuan. And they did an immediate search to figure out who they were. And that message comes to MacArthur next day, you know, these are who those guys were. And MacArthur wants to get this message out, want immediately released to the press. Next slide, please. But when it goes back to Washington, Roosevelt's right in the middle. They've got exchange ships going at that time. They're doing all these diplomatic measures, and he doesn't want to release it. As well, they think if they release this information, it will increase the violence against the prisoners there in the Philippines and elsewhere. And so they hold on to the story for 6 months. The thing is before they left, McCoy, Melnick, and Dias, those are the guys that ran the escape. Commander McCoy, Stephen Melnick, who's in Coast Artillery, and then William Dias, who was one of the great air pilots of the war. Dias had written home, told what happened, and press guys know something's going on, and so they're hounding Dias for his story. And it's not until 6 months later that they finally, Chicago Tribune had the rights to the story. Dias gave it to him. But the thing is when they release it in January of 44, Dias is already dead. He had come home. He immediately became a test pilot, crashed a test pilot P-38 there in Los Angeles. So his story has that effect that they thought it would. It immediately starts, goes in the Chicago Tribune. It'll be throughout all the papers. Life magazine publishes a big story about it. And then it generates all that support for the Pacific. We've got to go there and take care of this, because everybody had just been Eurocentric basically for that whole time. But Dias will never see this. I have the one picture of Paul Marshall there on the end. In the story in Life, Paul Marshall was the only one they didn't show a picture of. And that's because Marshall stayed there and became head of the 114th Guerrillas. There on the eastern end of the island. And so they didn't want to give away his picture at that time. There was another guy with him named Robert Spielman. I interviewed Spielman in the 90s, and he was an elementary school teacher. And he said, Jim, there's no way these kids could ever realize one of the greatest joys of my life would be to shoot a Japanese soldier in the stomach and just watch him squirm, because he had seen so much. And when he gets out, these guys are all about payback, pretty much. And we'll go to the next slide. Now, this is what Dapakal looks like. As you can see, the jungle is all surrounding it. You've got these 8 barracks there that hold all those 200. This thing has sawmills, rice mills. It's got a train there. It's got coffee plantations. It's got lemons. It's got limes. It's got oranges. And the prisoners are not allowed to eat anything. It's like Major Maeda says, if I gave you all food, all you're going to do is escape. And when those guys had escaped, conditions became a lot worse there. There was this one Lieutenant Yuki who looked out for the prisoners. He was a pretty good guy, and he was pretty good to them. But as soon as those guys escaped, he's gone. That's why most of those people in that camp, they hate those guys that escape, because they made conditions so much worse for them. Later on, in April of 1944, almost a year later, you're going to have another big escape. This one's real messy. They kill a couple of the guards. A couple of the prisoners get killed. This guy on the top left, Mark Wofield, that's a picture of him with his hands up on the death march. He's going to be one of the guys that escapes from Davao Penal Colony. He'll hook up with the guerrillas there, become part of their unit. Same with these guys on the bottom, James Hayburn and Jim McClure. They'll all become guerrillas as well. But the main thing these escapes do is when that Melnick guy gets back to Washington, they start working with this MIS-X section. Now, MIS-X had worked in Europe, working with prison camps, trying to get supplies into the camps, trying to organize breakouts from the camps. And Melnick convinces the War Department to send one of these teams to the Philippines. This guy, Harold Rosenquist, is going in. He's going to look into how they can bust out everybody from that Davao Penal Colony. But he arrives in June, and everybody from the penal colony is already gone. May of 45 was the first time they got back in there. Everybody had been moved out June, July of 1944. They knew they left some prisoners there that were too sick. When the team comes in May 45, they find this guy and about 14 others, just skeletons. This guy collapsed in the sink and was left there. Now, they said they were Chinese and Filipinos, but the only people that were there were Americans. So, I mean, were they just saying that for the photographs? We don't know. Next picture. Next slide, sorry. Now, these are Chick Parsons and Charlie Smith. These are those guys that were the agents. And these guys are really the ones that will organize all those unsurrendered personnel. Because, the thing with the unsurrendered, they had to make a choice. Do I go into Japanese captivity or do I try to make it on the outside? Every insect will kill you. If you get a scratch in the jungle, you've got nothing to, work with it. It's going to get infected and you're probably going to lose a limb because of it. Every animal, crocodiles, is there to kill you. There was one guy, this guy, Robert Ball, who went through every scenario he could think of. And he went into the jungle with a group of other people that he didn't know. And on this trail, all of a sudden, everybody started streaming past him. And he's like, what's going on? And the guy was like, nobody could talk to him until finally a Chinese guy was like, bees. And he's like, what? The guy chopping up front had hit a beehive and 1,000 bees came out. And these bees were killing everybody because all of a sudden you'd have, 10,000 bees on you, stinging you to death. And so it just shows, everything out there was there to kill you. Now, some of these guys did take that chance. And they were what becomes the guerrilla forces on all the islands. Down there in Mindanao, like I said, it was probably the easiest place to, put this thing together. Chick Parsons, Charlie Smith, they're going to come in, start organizing these guerrillas. These guerrillas are going to be a lot of help to these prisoners, as time will go by. And so all this is run by MacArthur's headquarters that comes in. Charlie Smith had been a mining engineer in the Philippines before the war. He started working for the army, got down to Mindanao, and they said surrender. He said, no way. He jumped on a sailboat and sailed 3,000 miles to Australia. He had never been in a sailboat before. When he comes back with Chick Parsons, Parsons had run the Luzon stevedoring. He's a millionaire. He lost his whole fortune. When the Japanese came in, he was a naval officer, but he was also the Panamanian consul in the Philippines because Panama didn't have anybody there. So he hung a Panamanian flag outside his house, said he was the consul, and kind of like Wickham before, got put into Santa Tomas, gets on an exchange ship. As soon as he shows up in Washington, MacArthur's like, get him out here, because this guy had been in the Philippines his whole life, knows how to speak all the dialects, knows everybody on all the islands, and he's going to be the main organizer of all guerrillas that come in. And the funny thing is like, soon as Smith showed up in Australia, MacArthur was like, wow, you sailed the whole way? Guess what? You're on a submarine. You're going back in. And he goes in with Parsons that first time. Now, following their return to Australia, when they picked up all those people, that the escapees that came out with them, their word gave MacArthur a good picture of everything that was going on with the guerrillas there in Mindanao. As well, they set up all these coast watching stations. Now, the United States Navy never wanted to run any guerrilla shipments or anything like that. But when they set up these coast watching stations, all of a sudden they're getting a lot of feed on ships that they can sink. And so then they're like, yeah, we're all for this. So they'll start putting in radio teams, weather teams, air warning teams to be able to work with the guerrillas. And the Navy will put all these in as well. They'll give the MacArthur's headquarters the USS Nautilus and USS Narwhal, which are the two biggest submarines that they have, and they'll use these as guerrilla submarines. That last picture is of Parsons getting a suntan, because every time he went into the Philippines, he would have to look like a Filipino, and he could get a real dark deep tan. The one thing that always ticked him off with higher ups is when he was a kid, he had a big giant eagle tattooed across his chest. He's a commander in the Navy. That last picture is Parsons. When he was a kid, he married into this Jerica family. Now, Jerica's had a plantation down on Mindanao, and he married this girl, Kathy, who was like 16. Her brother goes to the Naval Academy. He's the one that plans the Doolittle operation. And the other brother, this guy, Tom Jerica, he's the little kid on the right side. He'll be one of the main guerrillas in the Philippines working with Parsons. And when Cebu before Cebu surrenders, the island of Cebu, he blows up the whole city. Said it was the funnest thing he ever did in his life. But he'll go back to Australia, and he'll be coordinating all those supplies things that come in. Now, the thing is Blanche Jerica, the mother-in-law of Chick Parsons, when Parsons came in one time, some of his materials that were going to be given to guerrillas got intercepted by a spy, and they arrested his mother-in-law. She gets beheaded at the North Cemetery in December of 1944, along with all those other guerrillas at the same time. Next slide. Now, surrender, like I said, was a hard concept, and the thing, not all those things, but who do you trust? I mean, you meet somebody, you don't know if they're going to turn you into the Japanese, because if you harbor any of these people, you're going to get executed as it comes through. Now, Wendell Fertig, he's the guy who will take over Mindanao. He had basically hid in the mountains for about 4 months. But the thing is if you were a Philippine guerrilla and tried to take control, then you had every other Philippine guerrilla saying, no, I'm in control. And they were all, they killing more Filipinos than they were Japanese, basically. So this one guy, Morgan, goes to Fertig and says, look, you need to be in charge. They spread this rumor that he was a general brought in by submarine. And so then he's the guerrilla commander on Mindanao for like the rest of the time. Down below him, this Busron Kala. Now he is a Islamic Moro. And there has never been peace between the Islamic Moros and the Christians of Mindanao. As soon as the surrender came, the Islamics started coming down to the lowlands and just massacring Christians. And this guy, Luis Morgan, started reciprocity that goes along with them. And Busron Kala, he runs this area around Lake Lanao, which is right in the middle of Mindanao. Now, he hates Americans. But as soon as the Japanese come, he hates Japanese just as much because that's his land, And he'll never go along with the Americans until the submarines start coming in, bringing in BARs, machine guns. And as soon as that come in, then they're like, oh, yeah, we'll join your group, because they want all that equipment. And so it's really the only time that they have any kind of meshing between Islamics and Christians on Mindanao ever. Up in the top right, when those Americans had gone to this camp named Don Salon, the prison camp, there's one guy, Sergeant Bill Nortz, with him. He was with like the 14th Bomb Squadron. And this guy was just he's a hero. I'm sorry. He's one of my favorites of all of them. Like, unlike in Luzon, whereas if you said anything to a Japanese, you were going to get your head chopped off. This guy was a judo expert. And all the Japanese guards loved watching him just toss all Japanese guards everywhere. I mean, he was just beating the crap, beating them all up,
Mm-hmm.
July 4th comes along. He escapes, joins in the guerrillas. He's this guy that goes and organizes the entire east coast of Mindanao because he's just so tough. Nobody's going to stand up to him. And then in September of 43, he's taken an overloaded boat with supplies back to that east coast, and it swamped. And he tried to swim to shore in shark-infested waters. Last anybody heard was a bunch of gunshots, and he was never seen again. He was only 24 years old. But this is the kind of guys that, aren't going to surrender, and they're going to do everything they can to be part of that group. Down to the left, that's Macario Peralta. He was a 65th infantry officer with the 61st Filipino group. He's there on Panay. Panay's the worst of all of them. The Japanese, that's where they, have most of their growing there, and they have a big presence there. They'll massacre about 3,000 Filipino civilians. And Peralta is a guy that, he knows he needs American help, but don't dare try and interfere with him. He knows Panay. He's a Filipino. He doesn't need, them to be telling him what to do, basically. Canglion, he didn't want the job of commander of Leyte. It's really Chick Parsons that talks him into it. He'll become the Secretary of Defense after the war's over. This guy at the bottom right on that guerrilla boat, the Athena, they mounted 40 Miller Beaufort guns on this thing. It's made out of plywood, basically. And at the front of that, that's this guy named Clyde Childress. Next slide, please. Now, Clyde was with that 61st Infantry. He was down in that battle of Malabang. And basically, he got pushed out. The Japanese were able to smash him up. And he is suffering from malaria so bad he's held up in this shack when the surrender happens, and so he misses the whole thing. Now, this one picture I put on the left, this is the most haunting picture to me. This is a pre-war shot of Childress with his friends, and these are all guys that were hauled out of the 31st or all those scout units to train all those Filipinos. And the guy at the bottom, that's Harry Katz. He was with the 45th Infantry. He's going to die on the Shinyo Maru Hellship. The guy next to him is Floyd Fort. He gets killed on the Ganassi Road defending Malabang. Next to him is Clyde Childress. He'll become a guerrilla commander on Mindanao. Next to him is Lieutenant Walter Hinkle. He gets wounded at Malabang. Japanese doctor cuts off his foot. He'll get rescued at Bilibid. Next guy there is First Lieutenant James Brickton. He dies on the Hellship Oroku Maru. And then that's McClish next to him. He also becomes a guerrilla commander. And then finally, that last guy is George Weiland. He's with the 57th. He's going to die on the Shinyo Maru as well. So, I mean, these guys will all go into prison camp, but McClish as well as Childress make the decision to stay out of it. That picture on the right there shows McClish there with Wendell Fertig. Now, the thing is Wendell Fertig is kind of a heart of darkness kind of guy. He goes up and holds up in the uplands with a radio and basically just has radio contact with people. He's not mixed up in anything. He's writing his memoirs, things like that. Childress is the guy who's, him is Robert Bowler, these other who are actually doing all the work. And when Childress leaves, Fertig writes this report that says he's the worst, says he's a disloyal, and he'll do that to every single regular U.S. Army officer on the islands, worried about what they're going to say about him. Next one, please. Luzon guerrillas. Now, these are all guys that escaped that death march, escaped from that and hook up. There's not going to be any central command on Luzon because that's where most of the Japanese are. You're not going to have any kind of contact with them until about 1944. That's when they can get in those first radios. This guy on the left is Albert Noble. He evaded capture on Bataan with this guy Martin Moses, went north to hook up with a guy named Prager who had evaded capture up there. Prager had just gotten a hold of MacArthur's headquarters via a radio that he had, and then they all get captured. They'll all get executed. This guy, Robert Lapham, right next to him, he's right before the surrender on Bataan, they had sent out this party under this guy named Clyde Thorpe, and they set up a guerrilla command on Mount Pinatubo, the place that erupted about 20 years ago. And they're there to watch Clark Field as well. When the surrender comes, Thorpe breaks up his group. Lapham is one of those. He and this other guy, Anderson, they'll set up camp. Now, most of these guerrillas go into the mountains because that's where they can be and not have to deal with Japanese coming in there. Whereas Anderson and Lapham saying, we can't do that. We have to be down there on the lowlands so we can mix up with these people. These are going to be the guys that offer the most aid when the liberation of those camps come later on, because they do operate in the lowlands. Lapham, he's kind of like Yasser Arafat. He never sleeps the same place, 2 nights in a row. Ray Hunt up on the top, he's going to be one of these guys that works with Lapham. He too will be instrumental in the liberating of these camps that'll happen later on. And finally down there, Anderson, he didn't get a radio until June of 1944. Who shows up to give it to him? Chick Parsons. He's the guy that organizes all these people. Next slide. Now, the aid is all this stuff that's coming. These people are funneling in supplies for not only the guerrillas, but for the people in general, trying to keep the Philippine population on their side. When Parsons goes in and with Chick Smith in 1943, this guy, Courtney Whitney, will take over what they call Philippine Regional Subsection. And they deal with all the guerrillas in the Philippines. They organize everybody. They'll send in propaganda items for all the Filipinos as well. They create 10 military districts where all these guys, the different guerrillas, will be responsible from. They don't want anybody mixing, because if one group falls, they don't want the other group falling. About 1943, the Japanese will start executing civilians on the island of Negros, and they send in those submarines, Narwhal, that's a picture of it down there on the right, to lift out hundreds of civilians. That's one family, DC McKay, Mary McKay, she was an 8-year-old girl. They get taken off with about 32 civilians. And so they're looking out for all these people that are unsurrendered as well. The Narwhal is going to play a very big role in an upcoming prisoner escape that happens. And finally, that captain up there, that's Frank Latta. He'll run 5 missions of this Narwhal, bringing in supplies, about 500 tons for all these guerrillas on all the different islands. He'll take over the USS Lagardo. He'll be sunk with his whole crew in May of 1945 up there around Indonesia. And finally, that last picture, instead of the Narwhal, is John McGee. He's the last escapee from Davao. In June of 1944, the Japanese are starting to move all their prisoners to Japan. So they take all those prisoners from Davao, about 1,000 of them. They put them on or about 800 of them. And there's about 600 that are left there working on this Lasang airfield. And they put them on this Yashu Maru, which goes up to Zamboanga. Now, that John McGee guy, that was where his training ground was. He was training Filipinos there. He jumps off the ship and swims to shore, immediately hooks up with friends, and he's put in touch with guerrillas. And he and the Narwhal are going to have a meeting, which comes up next. And that's the next slide. Now, all those prisoners, in 1944, the Japanese decide to start moving all the British, Australians, Dutch from all those camps overseas back to Japan. They want all those factory workers in Japan to be able to join the military. And so they've decided now that the Americans are getting closer, they're going to move everybody up there to Japan. And they're going to put them on these ships, which will get the moniker known as Hellships, because they really are. These people are going to be packed into holds by the thousands, where you can fit maybe 100 people. You're going to pack 1,700 of them in there, standing up, nowhere to sleep, lie down, no food, no water. Same experience, you've had all the time. And it's like we all said before, you're hoping it's going to get better. No, it's not going to get any better. The first one is that Shinyo Maru. All those guys that were working down on the Lasang airfield on Davao, 750 of them are tied up, blindfolded. They're put on this ship, the Shinyo, or they're put on a ship that takes them out of Davao to that Zamboanga harbor where McGee basically escaped. And they shift him to this other ship, the Shinyo Maru. A couple of days later, that's going up the west coast of Mindanao, and the USS Paddle, American submarine, is there. Ship's not marked. None of these ships are going to be marked as holding prisoners of war. The Paddle puts 3 torpedoes in it. Everybody goes into the water. The Japanese start machine gunning everybody swimming, clubbing to death everybody swimming. Nobody gets rescued. 81 of them make it to shore. Who's on shore? John McGee. That's where his guerrilla command is. And he gets everybody in, puts them in with Filipinos. They get the word back to headquarters in Australia. Australia sends up the USS Narwhal and rescues all those guys, those 81 guys, puts them all on, says, at first they're like, we can't get everybody in. And the captain's like, nope, get them all in here. And we're going to get them back. And those 81 guys will make it back. Now they'll start pumping people on Luzon into Bilibid Prison. September, October, Cabanatuan, there's about 6,000 people there. And they'll start emptying that. They'll send them all down to Bilibid. They'll open up that back hospital that had been used as a communicable disease area, and they'll start packing them in there as well. Soon after all of them left in December, that's when the civilian internees from Baguio up north came down and were in there. And they're in that same place, and they find all the graffiti of all those guys that were there. And they find, God D. MacArthur, God D. Roosevelt, damn God, everything, and they read what all these guys are writing their last will and testaments on the walls, basically. They'll move about 8,000 through that hospital area, through that Bilibid camp. Thing is when now they're bringing in all the details from other places that nobody's seen before, and this Nichols field detail comes in. They had it the worst. The White Angel, that was what they called their commander. He would set up gauntlets where every Japanese had a 2x4. And you got beat as you ran through it. You were starved to death. As you can see, all those guys are skeletons. They throw them in Bilibid. They start starving them anymore because weak, starving POWs are more suppliant in attitude, especially when you're going to pack them in to all these hell ships. The next big one is in October. In July, the Canadian Inventor had gone out, and that was the one Ben Steele was on. It had the longest trip because they had problems with their boilers on it. It took them 47 days to get to Japan, almost all of the summer and fall. But the thing is they don't lose anybody on that ship. They're able to keep it together. Now, the other one, the Nisio Maru, right below that, I have a picture of this chaplain there. Now, that's Stanley Riley. Now, the Nisio Maru went out in July as well. And these guys, and this is a typical thing. You get put in this hold, you're standing up, there's no room to even lie down or sit down. Your bathroom is a bucket in the middle for 1,700 people. You're getting rice buckets let down. You've got limited water. Everybody's got dysentery. There's nowhere to go. So, and they've all got seasickness now. And so they're all in there in their own filth. And 3 days out of Formosa, American submarines made torpedo run on the ship, the Nisio Maru. It sunk one of the other freighters, but things passed under. Everybody started freaking out, panicking. The lights, when there's no light, they start clawing at each other. They start fighting amongst themselves. It just becomes bedlam. And this one priest somehow was able to just be like, nope, not going to happen here. Get it together, men. They started to rush this ladder that was the only way out. If they had done that, the Japanese would have shot all of them trying to get out. Riley mounts the ladder, gets them saying the Lord's Prayer, gets them under control, gets it to where they all work together to finally sit down. And all these guys that had gone crazy, they all just start crying, because they knew they almost reached that point that other ships are going to reach. And I always say every ship needed a Stanley Riley.
Oh, yeah.
Because somehow his voice was able to soothe all these men on that ship. And the next one to the left of Riley is the Oroku Maru. Oroku Maru leaves in October, drifts down south for about a week, waiting for a convoy, then takes the convoy north. October 24th, this is 4 days after MacArthur's people have landed in Leyte. And that was the horrible thing. All these prisoners that are now on these Hellships, they had seen all those American airplanes flying over Manila, bombing Manila Bay, thinking that, oh, we're going to be liberated, and then the Japanese put them on. Oroku Maru goes up. It's not marked. USS Shark, USS Snook put torpedoes in it, split it in half. It stays afloat for 4 hours. The Japanese locked the hatches. We're going to let everybody drown. The Americans were able to open them up, climb out, get into the water, get over to a destroyer, but the Japanese destroyer won't pick up any of them. And out of 1,777, only 9 survive. Go to the left of that one, now we're going to head into the worst one. So next slide, please. And this is the story of the Oroku Maru and the journey of the 1,619. On December 13th, 1944, 1,619 men were marched from Bilibid to Manila's Pier 7. That was that pier that I showed you there, and they were put on the Oroku Maru. This was an inter-island liner that the Japanese had. It's kind of nice. They also put about 2,000 civilians on the top decks, and they're going to load all 1,619 prisoners down in the bottom decks. Now, the temperatures down there were about 120. They have them in 3 holds. The front hold holds about 700. The middle holds about 200 of the medical personnel. And the rear holds about another 700. These guys get pitched in the dark when they leave on December 13. It's 120 degrees. They close the hatches. Up front, a lot of these, the guy who's in front of it is Beecher, that guy that runs Cabanatuan. A lot of these guys hold him responsible for a lot of things, because he was an officer. And they start saying in the dark, you're not going to make it, Beecher. There's no water for you either. And then somebody starts cutting people's necks to drink the blood out of them. And then this is all darkness. And then it becomes a melee in there. And the guys in the middle hold, they can hear everybody up front just at ease, at ease. Now in the back hold, they had all these shelving in back, and they stuffed about 75 to 100 of these, or 100 of these guys in these shells. The Japanese did. They all pass out immediately. They start dying from suffocation. So after that first night, you've got maybe 75 dead, in these holds. And that picture next to the Oroku Maru, Commander Francis Bridget, he had run the naval battalion on Bataan, a great leader. A lot of people, again, looked at him as an officer, but when his chance came on the Oroku Maru, he once again stood up to the plate. And he tried to get everybody settled down because they were going to descend the same madness that front hold did. He climbed the ladder when the Japanese threatened to shoot him, said, you got to open these hatches. We're all, dying. I've got people dying of suffocation down here. He did everything he could. They opened the hatches, tries to get water down there, tries to get the men engaged in other things to keep them whole. And he's really the reason that they don't descend into madness on the second night, because that next day, all of a sudden that air power comes back, and the USS Cabot, USS Hornet, groups from them attack the Oroku Maru, and they'll hit all those upper decks and just cause a massacre of all those Japanese civilians. Jack Schwartz, that guy that was locked in the hot box in Cabanatuan, he's hauled up topside to work on all these Japanese. He's like, can I at least have a drink of water and wash my hands or something? No, get to work. All those doctors are like that. They said that some 2,000 Japanese were killed up top. The blood's dripping through to the bottom. Now they tow the Oroku Maru right off the coast of Subic Bay. That's it. Over on the left, you can see it smoking. They unload all the Japanese civilians, but they don't unload the Americans. And that second night, they descend into madness once again. 120 degrees, stifling heat. Finally, the next morning, the Japanese say, we're going to unload. We're going to send you ashore. All the civilians are gone. Then the air power comes back. They start bombing the ship. The Americans in the back hold, they try to get out. The Japanese start shooting them, but they all start coming out on top decks. And the Japanese are like, just swim to shore. They all get over the side. You know, some 250 are killed in that last bombing raid. They'll make it over the side. Now, this George Petrich, which you see up next to Bridget, he's one of two that'll escape. He had been in those shelves. He suffocated. He passed out for 2 days. Finally, this Commander Nash, you know, was trying to wake people up, and Petrich gets up, and he says, "Come on, we're swimming to shore." And Petrich's like, "Nope, I'm done." And he waits till the sun hits a point in the water where the Japanese won't be able to see. He escapes. He and this guy named Darnell Kadoff are the only two that'll escape from that ship. They'll get picked up by the Americans later. Now, when everybody's there on the beach at Subic Bay, right off of Longapo, the Japanese hold them off with a machine gun until they're ready to let them all on. They all come ashore, and they're put in. If you look at that next picture at the bottom, you can see this rectangle. That's a tennis court. They packed 1,320 people into that tennis court. There is no water. All of them are now naked because they, doffed all their clothes to get ashore. There's no food, and a lot of these guys are wounded, from the Oroku Maru problem, and they've still all got dysentery there on it. They're going to keep them there for 6 days in the sun. They finally bring in a water faucet. And these guys say that they never understood how water had the best taste of anything in the world until that point. They give them a sack of rice, not cooked, but uncooked. And everybody's taking 5 grains and holding them on their tongue. You're going to start losing people there. After the 5th day, the trucks will show up and take them to what they call this San Fernando Theater. That's that place up at top. San Fernando is everybody's memory from the Death March. That's where the trains were. They pack them into these 2 places, the old jail as well as this theater. And dysentery's, just ramped through there, becomes a filth hole. They'll feed them, give them some water, but not enough to get them anything. And then they'll pack them on a train the next day and take them up north to Lingayen Gulf. And that's about 1,300 of them. 16 of those guys are taken out of the theater because they're too sick to be moved, and they'll never see them again anywhere. They get up to that north coast, and they're put on these 2 ships, the Oroku Maru and the Brazil Maru. The thing is they have to jump off a dock that's 25 feet up from the boat that'll take them there. These guys break their legs in the jump, trying to get out there, and they pack them into these things. Now, right when they got there, Japanese cavalry was unloading there, and they get put on the ships where all these horses were, and they're just filled with manure. And then they get on there. There's no food, no water. You're going to lose more people. Roe Boydine said, "Can't you just give me a drink of water?" And the Japanese guy said, "This is war. There is no room for kindness." And boy, that was sure on this, because when they get put on the Oroku Maru, January 9th, there in Takao Harbor, you can see in that picture there, second from the right, it gets bombed by 14th Air Force. And up in the front part, it hits right outside the hold. Steel splinters go through. They kill about 200 people. That's where all the medical personnel are. There's another hold behind them, but the Japanese don't let anybody go over to help the people in the first hold. For 3 days, they have to sit there with all the dead in there, and they start stacking them like cordwood, naked bodies waiting to be lifted out of that hold. Now, next to that picture is Thomas Hayes. He's the guy I told you about that became the commander of Bilibid Prison. The doctor, when they let Sarton go, he was moved out with that last contingent. He gets killed in that bombing attack. He's stacked in all those bodies. When they haul him out, he's naked, covered in feces, with a rope around his ankle. And that's the way they'll all go out, and they'll all get put into a mass grave on Formosa. And then everybody gets packed on that Brazil Maru for the trip to Japan. And that's the next slide, please. Brazil Maru is nothing but a death ship. They leave those tropical waters of Formosa, and they're heading into the January waters of Japan. They've all got those rags from the tennis court they're wearing. They all start freezing to death, getting pneumonia. There is no water on this one. There is no food on this one. Sidney Stewart said he had to bite the finger off of a dead West Point officer to get a West Point ring to be able to trade it to a Japanese for a cup of water. And that's what it comes down to. 500 more will die on this ship. And there's even talk that maybe some cannibalism was going on this ship.
Wow.
When they reached Japan, there's only 450 left there. Now, I've showed these guys to the right. They're all West Point graduates. Robert Barker, he had gone through everything. There's like 294 West Point graduates in. He's a United States Military Academy, and 174 of those guys, they're going to die there. Barker's one of them. Right next to him, that's Godfrey Ames. He ran Battery C on Corregidor. He made the trip the whole way, but when they dock at Moji, the port there, he walks off a human skeleton and he dies shortly after. His best friend was this guy, Paul Cornwall, below him. They had been West Point graduates together. They both served in that Battery C together. And Cornwall would never talk to anybody about the experience because he didn't want to have to tell anybody what their son, their brother, their father, or their grandfather had to do in order to survive. You know, because the thing is on that Brazil Maru, if you were incapacitated and you couldn't move, you lost all your clothes. You know, because they were freezing to death on there. And it was dog eat dog, you know, and that's what Cornwall meant. You know, I didn't want to have to tell people what their relative had to do to survive. Now we'll go to the next one. Now the return, and this is where everybody, you know, the liberation comes. It's too late. You know, by the time they land at Lingayen, most of those guys have been moved off. There's only 1,300 military POWs left. There's about 500 there at Cabanatuan, about 800 down at Bilibid Prison. But there's also the 600 that were moved to Palawan, and I talked about them earlier. They went sent down there to build an airstrip. When they get there, the bombings start happening in September of '44. They move half the camp back to Bilibid on Luzon, and those guys are all in the Oroku Maru. You know, they all pass away on there. But 300 stayed. Now the thing is the commander on Palawan, he had all those 150 left build these air raid shelters, and he's planning on exterminating them. I mean, we know that. And in December 13th or 14th, this is the day they load the Oroku Maru, and it's also the day that MacArthur invades Mindoro Island. The commander throws them in, says an air raid's coming, throws them in there, ignites them, lights them all on fire. If you tried to get out, you got machine gunned or you got bayoneted. 11 guys were in one that was next to a cliff. They jumped off the cliff into the trash heaps about 40 feet below. 11 of them got to the guerrillas and told, you know, them this is what's going to happen. So when everybody lands at Luzon on January 9th, they know that they've got to liberate these camps because they know that this is very much a possibility that can happen at all the other camps. They have to wait till the end of January because that's when 6th Army Commander Kruger feels like he has enough people to be able to make these runs, but that's when they make the drives to liberate the camps. Now, Robert Lapham, there he is again. Next to that one picture, he knew as soon as he found out that the forces had landed on Guy, and he got on a horse, rode it 40 miles to 6th Army headquarters, said, look, you got to go into Cabanatuan right now. We've been watching this. I've been wanting you guys to come in here and liberate this. They get with the intelligence officer of Horton White, and Kruger agrees. They give it to the 6th Army Rangers under Henry Mucci, and he'll get Robert Prince's C Company as well as the guys from F Company to make this drive down to Cabanatuan. Where they're going to rescue these guys. And they will have about 2 teams of Alamo scouts. These are special scouts that Kruger had created in 1943. They'll make the 68-mile march to get there to the camp. They'll get there early that morning. They're sidelined by guerrillas that work for Lapham's people the whole time. They'll make it right to a town outside the camp that next morning, and they'll hold up there till that night. Now, this guerrillas there right next to him, that's Juan Pajota's guys. And what they're going to do is they're going to set up roadblocks at the Cabu Bridge to the left of the camp and to Cabanatuan on the road there, because there's hundreds of Japanese in each of those places. About 7:30 that night, the Rangers spring the trap. There's a couple of hundred Japanese in there. See, the Japanese camp commanders had all left, and the prisoners there were left on their own. But the thing is Japanese troops moving north were always coming through there almost every day, so they didn't leave, you know. So that night, the Rangers come in. They liberate everybody. Duckworth is there, that hospital one guy. He's like, I'm in command here. Who are you people? Not realizing that they're being rescued at that point. That guy, Ralph Hibbs, is there. And he's like, so, confused by everything. He's like, I got to give back my stuff. And he said, the last thing, I was the last one out of the camp only because I got kicked in the pants by a 6th Army Ranger. They rescue all the prisoners there. One of the goofiest things in there is that picture in the middle on the bottom. The guy second from left, he was a British guy. He had been sunk on a British hellship, a Japanese hellship carrying all the Brits from Singapore. And he was on a raft that got rescued by the Japanese, and they put him into Cabanatuan about 2 weeks before that. And then he's there when the Rangers come and liberate him. And so he's, thinking I'm dead. And then next thing you know, he's, liberated from this camp that comes through. So 511 will make it out of this camp. That's them at Guimba right there. The Rangers got him out the whole time. Filipinos were lining the whole way they were going. And when they made it to Guimba, they took this shot. That's Ralph Hibbs right there in the front row on the left with his arms up in the air. He was that guy that, he's the one who's going to go find out that his girlfriend had been murdered by the Japanese. And we'll go to the next one. And this is the Bilibid liberation. See, the thing is once they get into Cabanatuan, they realize they got to get to Manila. There's 6,000 civilians there at Santo Tomas, and then you've got Bilibid prison there that has about 500 civilians and about another 800 military prisoners. So MacArthur sends the 1st Cavalry Division with a flying cabinet and sends the 37th Division in. 1st Cavalry Division goes in. They rescue all those civilian prisoners at Santo Tomas on the 3rd of February. Thing is the 37th got held up at the Tuliahan River there, and they don't get in until the 4th. And for some reason, they didn't know that there was prisoners at Bilibid. And it was almost by mistake that they found them, because that night, one of the platoons had gone in there looking for cover, and they found a door that was boarded up, and they took it off, and then they see Americans in there, and the Americans don't want to talk to them because they think it's a bunch of Japanese. And finally, they threw it in a pair of old gold cigarettes, and the Americans were like, holy cow, this is our guys here. And so that's how the Bilibid got liberated that night, because the guards had left that morning. They knew that the Americans were coming, and they told the civilians as well as the military guys, we're out of here. You should stay in here because things are going to get bad outside real bad. This shows the cell block, the hospital, right after it's been liberated. There's some 37th guys in there. MacArthur will come visit the camp a couple of days later. This is him leaving with 37th Division Commander Beetler. A lot of guys didn't know what to think of him. A lot of guys were very happy to see MacArthur. A lot of guys blame MacArthur, for all that happened there. Down here on the left, this is David Hardy on the far right leaning. Now, Hardy had been on the death march. The thing is, he was a commander of that Provisional Air Regiment, and he was at the headquarters of the 2nd Corps for like a couple of weeks until they moved him out. So his death march wasn't anything. He was allowed to fill his canteen. He was allowed to get food. The Japanese allowed that. And when he got to that train at San Fernando, he was in okay shape, so it wasn't that bad for him. But he's going to go to Mindanao with that group down there. He's going to get this hernia that will sideline him, and that's the only reason he gets liberated at Bilibid. But the thing is MacArthur comes up to him and he said that's the only time he lost his composure, because MacArthur came up and said, I remember the last time I saw you when I gave you the Provisional Air Regiment. You did a great job up there. And Hardy just started bawling right there, because they were related. Hardy was a Hardy, and MacArthur's mom was a Hardy, and they were distant cousins, from that point. MacArthur meets with all these people, but like I said, it's a, he does his best to meet with all of them there at Bilibid at that point. And many were there that said, this was totally natural and nothing made up about it. MacArthur was pretty grim and pretty choked up the whole time he was there. That day after they got liberated, all the Manila started burning. And so that's the fires around Bilibid prison. They had to move him out of there, move him up to Angti Bay Shoe Factory. We'll go to the next one. About to close it out here. Now, this is the Taihoko extermination order of August 1944. This was captured at a Formosa camp. And what it is the guidelines for how to exterminate all the prisoners under your control. This was something that was brought out during the war crimes trial later on, but it matched so much what was done on Palawan that they wonder, if this order went to all the camps. The thing is, though, is we know that the guys at Bilibid, they left that morning. You know, they weren't going to carry out anything like this. They left them on their own. As well, the camp commanders at Cabanatuan, you know, they left them there as well. And so, you know, was this just for that camp, or was this something that went out, or, you know, has it been decided? This is kind of like the Masanobu Tsuji thing. It's still a mystery, you know, as to exactly what was the purpose of this. The thing is, MacArthur, he goes through all those places. He goes to visit O'Donnell, where the cross was. He goes to Palawan, where all those prisoners were burned to death down there. When they liberated all those Cabanatuan guys, he went and sat there with all of them. That's him with Duckworth up there. Hibbs said again there that it was the most genuine thing they'd ever seen. You know, MacArthur was totally destroyed by this. Down here at the bottom, once Americans land, all those unsurrendered people come back in, and they all get awarded the DSC. This is the guys after they'd all been awarded there. Next slide, please. Now, there's all those prisoners that have been removed from the Philippines. They go to Japan, of course. There's 175 different camps there. The Japanese needed everybody working at these places within the military. And so they have to mine copper, lead, nickel, coal, everything else. They're digging tunnels within mountains for getting ready for the invasion of Japan. And so these guys are working 7 days a week, all day, every day. Now there's no Filipinos right outside the camp. There's nobody smuggling medicine or food or anything like that as well. You've got no Filipino guerrillas on the outside doing their best to help everybody. And it just becomes waiting for death. And it's only because of those 2 atomic bombs that any of those guys survived. They all would have been executed. They all know it. The Japanese knew it. They were, you know, digging these tunnels knowing that all these guys weren't going to make it. And so it was those bombs that really save them. Now that one down there, that's Moji. That's the port that they bring them all in. Some guys get there, they immediately go to a delousing station. Other guys get brought to a holding cell where they all freeze to death. Other guys get put on a ferry to Shimonoseki, and all of a sudden they're on this train car in a nice seat with the best box lunch they've ever had, only to be taken to a camp where as soon as they get off, they get beaten to within, you know, nothing makes sense, you know, at all to anybody. Now, Ben Steele, he gets put in a coal mine there and will work 7 days a week. And the thing is, you get the job of, we've dug this shaft 40 feet into the coal. You climb under there with the dynamite. You set the charge for us to set it off, you know, and that's the work you're doing. And even though you're doing that, Steele said it kept him and his guys alive because it was the worst winter the Japanese ever saw. And if you were above ground, you were probably going to freeze to death. And so they felt that being in all these caves underground kept them safe. You're working nonstop, and then the B-29 start. The Americans start raiding Japan with the B-29s, the super fortress from the Marianas Islands, and you're going to eradicate 66 Japanese cities, and I mean flatten them. And the Japanese won't surrender, and camps are getting hit as well. And now the Japanese hold all the prisoners responsible for what's being inflicted upon them. The brutality becomes even worse for them. And like I said, it's you know, after that all happens, it's really those bombs that saves the lives of everybody there. And we'll go to the next slide. Oh, wait a minute. Hold on, come back.
No worries.
Yeah, sorry. The surrender will come right after that. And when MacArthur, no, the slide after that one. So the next one. Yeah, right. That at the bottom, that's MacArthur accepting the Japanese surrender, and standing right behind him are Wainwright and Percival. They both got rescued from a camp in Manchuria, or Sion actually, up in China, which was near Mukden, and they got flown to Chongqing. They got flown to Manila, and then MacArthur says, "Fly them up here because I want them with me on the deck of the Missouri." After that, Wainwright and Percival would both be flown to Japan or to Philippines, where they'll take the surrender of Yamashita there at Baguio. And so MacArthur will very much highlight these two people. Next slide. And it should be that liberation slide.
We've got senior officers at Manila. Wainwright returns.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. No, next one before that. I'm sorry.
Good. Surrender negotiation team. Yep.
Yeah, the surrender negotiating team, that's the Japanese group that shows up in Manila on August 19th. And when they show up, they're MacArthur instructed them, I want to know where all the camps are. I want to know what every camp is made of. I want to know where, everybody is, who is what, everybody. All the Japanese bring that to them. And so as soon as they've got an idea of where they're going to liberate all those camps, as soon as they get in there, August 29th, the Navy shows up in Tokyo Bay. They immediately send in that hospital ship to Omori to rescue all the guys there. As well, this guy, the place at Hitachi, as soon as the war ended, B-29s went from dropping bombs to dropping supplies on all the camps, food, clothing, everything else they could. And what a way to die. I mean, you go through the whole experience, and then you get crushed by a drum dropping supplies. And that happened many times. And so they started painting the roofs of all the camps, as you can see there, saying, drop things here, don't drop here, you're going to kill all of us, as to how they did that. A lot of these camps, like that Hitachi camp, these guys are, the Japanese won't tell them the war's over until about a week afterward. And then the camp commander is like, well, Japan's shaking hands with the world, so all bygones are bygones, and we're all friends now. And that's the way it is with a lot of them. And basically, a lot of Americans were said, that they were going to treat it like a judo match. And once the match is over, we're all friends again. But the Americans didn't take that. I think one camp, the guys broke out and immediately went to the Kempe Tai headquarters and beat up everybody who was in the place and took all their weapons from them. Now, all these camps will eventually be emptied out. Most of these guys will get on trains by themselves, make it down to Tokyo. They'll meet Americans. They'll put on hospital ships. They'll be flown to Okinawa and then to the Philippines. Down in Okinawa, one of the great stories is there's a group that is there on the tarmac waiting for a plane to go to Manila, and there's a army whack there that is walking back taking records. And she's like, anybody know Joe Siligato, this guy? And the guy raises his hands and he's like, I'm Joe. And she's like, I'm your wife. They both didn't even recognize it. She had joined the army to be out in the Pacific to try and find him. And there she does, finds him on Okinawa. These guys all go to the Philippines. They'll all be debriefed there. They'll be put on ships and they'll be sent back to the United States. Next and the last slide.
Yep.
Now, of those 20,000 Americans that surrendered, like we said, about half of them don't come home. Scholars, descendants, government officials, we're still trying to figure out the numbers on a lot of these things. I mean, people have kept records at the time, but like we were saying before, they're not complete, and so we don't know where every single person died. And it's still being researched today. We've still got our POW MIA defense agency that's there digging in the Philippines. There are so many people that are hooked into this story because of their relatives were all part of it, so they've done research their whole lives for this story. Now, those senior officers, they all come back to Manila. Like I said, about 95% of them will all make it. A lot of them will understand, what had happened, and they'll blame the United States more than anything for, being as unprepared as they were, for not, being too late for what they were trying to do. The war department had said there was no way to defend the Philippines before the war, but still they sent all those people out there. But William Brower, he had the 11th Division. He's going to blame MacArthur straight up and down. Say he was he hoodwinked everybody. He was a deceiver, a culprit, and everything, and no hero whatsoever. So it's going to be a mixed bag, about the way these guys look at everything. Now, Wainwright's going to go home. Truman will give him the Medal of Honor. And, unlike MacArthur, who won't go to a lot of these reunions, any of these reunions. Of course, when he comes home in 51, he was a very sick man. He was very sickly, pretty much till the rest of his days. Wainwright goes to all of them. He's their guy. And he goes to see them all. And that picture there, next to Wainwright getting the medal, that's Ben Steele, the guy that drew all those pictures.
Right. Yeah.
San Francisco, and he got to meet Wainwright there, just as pretty much all of them did. And Wainwright held on till about 54. Got very bad alcoholism. Just a sad story all the way around for probably one of the greatest men there was.
Yeah, absolutely.
The war crimes trials, they come afterward. They're going to go after a lot, most of these people. A lot of the, prisoners will say that it wasn't enough. They wanted these people, everybody buried underground. These guys right here, Homo, of course, is the one they go after the most. He's going to be tried in Manila. before all the Manilans, and they'll bring in witness after witness after witness. But immediately the cries of victor's justice start going up, even while all these people were telling these horrifying stories of exactly what happened to them. Homa's going to be executed there in the Philippines. And unlike Yamashita, who will be hanged, Homa is shot. And it'll be right there in the Philippines. And like I said, even though he had been cashiered basically out of the Japanese army, he's the one that everybody is looking at. These other guys, these are the people that had responsible for those murders on the Oroku Maru. All those guys that were brought out of that San Fernando theater were taken to San Fernando cemetery, and these three guys executed them. This is Shisuke Wada. He's up there on the left. And then Aihara, that's that guy Air Raid from Cabanatuan. And then the final guy is Juniburo Toshino. And they were all with that group that executed those people. And then as well, they were the ones that made sure nobody got any food or water. So they will pay the price. Wada does not. He gets a life sentence. But pretty much after the Americans leave, all those war crimes, people that were convicted, they are let go by the Japanese, pretty much. The other guy in the middle, that's Abby Abraham. He's with the grave registration. That's him digging up that San Fernando theater cemetery right there, where he finds those guys from the Oroku Maru. He'll spend his whole life under MacArthur's order to find everybody. Work still goes on till today. They weren't able to find everyone, and it's still happening today. The last figure there, that these guys that came home, it's like we were saying, they wanted something to be learned from this, and their whole thing was that lesson of unpreparedness. If you throw these people into an unprepared region, Americans are going to go through this, one more time. Bodine said, with the world on the verge of nukes and all that kind of stuff, it could happen again most easily. With anybody from any country, And Wainwright said, how much better would it have been to put a couple $1 million into a deterrent defense, there in the Philippines, rather than to have to pay that price of millions in the Pacific dead, of hundreds of thousands in the Philippines dead, of, what did the war cost the United States in the end? Like what, 50 billion or whatever, and so that's like they were saying, politicians that, sit there and moan and everything about what you have to put into it in order to have some kind of deterrent, it's ridiculous. And so that's, basically what it comes, all these guys, that's what they thought, but they didn't want to be forgotten. They didn't want their experience forgotten. That picture on the bottom right, that was a picture that was given to us back in the 70s by someone. We have no idea who any of those people are. We have no idea what camp that is, and that's how quickly and how easily it can be forgotten. And so that's why we did this exhibit. It's a horror story. And if you want to know any more about it and start reading about it, I'm going to tell you, it's a rabbit hole, and it's going to be a hard thing to climb out of it. I'm having a hard time myself. So.
Well, we're all just reading from it. I mean, just unrelenting horror after unrelenting horror, but so important to hear. And it's interesting that when we scheduled this show, we had no idea that the events are happening in Gaza, and how shocking events can come out of nowhere suddenly in this world. And these experiences, unfortunately, have not ended. The world is still
subject to human barbaric nature.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but changing the subject slightly, like, you're going to have to work next time you come. I'm putting some more facts in, James. Honestly, I mean, it's so lacking in detail, your presentations. Honestly, I'm
sorry.
Yep. No, I mean, James. It's always fantastic talking to you, and you can tell how deeply this story has got under your skin. Not just putting this exhibition together, but over the years, the MacArthur story on one level is that there's a level of, the individual. We've talked about it before, people like him or they don't like him. But below that is this massive, great story of the people who are under his command. And that story gets overlooked in the discussion of the egos. And thank you for bringing it to us, really. And well, I'm going to let you go and have a lie down and a cup of coffee or go back to work. Jim, it's been fantastic talking to you.
Maybe one day we'll see each other in person.
Yep, I'm in Maryland, probably, or Arlington area next March or something. So it's not too far down the road.
Let me know. So, I'm only a couple hours away.
Okay, well, brilliant. So, folks, I'm back in the morning or late in the evening, depending on what time where you are in the world, and then we're looking at the Filipino regiments with Marie. So, thank you, Jim. Thank you, everybody, for watching. This is Paul Dadge for World War II TV saying, try and recover from this one if you can. Cheers, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.